Imagine handing a modern billionaire's fortune to the wealthiest person alive 5,000 years ago. There would be no bank capable of holding it, no stock exchange to price it, and no legal system able to explain what owning part of a software company even meant. The numbers might be enormous, yet most of the fortune would be invisible. Send an ancient fortune in the opposite direction, and the confusion remains. Granaries, herds, farmlands, tribute, and thousands of laborers once represented extraordinary power. But today, a founder can control a company worth more than an old kingdom while owning very little land. Wealth keeps changing because society keeps changing what it needs most. Food made survival possible. Land produced food. Ships connected distant markets. Banks moved purchasing power through time. Machines multiplied human effort. Oil powered industry. Brands controlled demand. Software made repetition nearly free. Platforms gathered entire markets around themselves. Artificial intelligence is beginning to make parts of cognitive work scalable. Each era rewarded the person who controlled the hardest point to replace. That is the pattern behind the largest fortunes. Effort creates value, while ownership creates a lasting claim on the system surrounding that effort. A worker gets paid for today's production. An owner can earn from every future harvest, shipment, loan, license, or transaction passing through the asset. This story follows wealth from the first stored surplus to artificial intelligence, asking one question at every turning point. What did a person need to control to become wealthy in that world? And the answer begins before money ever existed, when somebody discovered how to make today's effort survive until tomorrow. Chapter 1: The Invention of Surplus. Now, for most of human history, becoming wealthy was kind of close to impossible, honestly. A skilled hunter could bring back more meat than his family could eat. A group might find trees heavy with fruit or pull hundreds of fish from a river. And for a few days, everybody had plenty. But then the meat spoiled, the fruit rotted, the fish disappeared, and hunger eventually returned. Nature could produce moments of abundance, but it rarely allowed anyone to keep them. And this placed nearly every human life inside the same narrow schedule. Food had to be found again and again. Water had to be carried. Firewood had to be collected. A family could own tools, hides, ornaments, and weapons, but anything heavy became a burden when the group moved, and they moved a lot. Even a valuable object had limited use if it couldn't help someone survive the next winter. The world contained lots of skilled people, respected people, and powerful people, yet extreme material wealth was pretty hard to hold. The richest hunter in the group still became hungry when the animals moved away. Then people began changing their relationship with time. Around 11,000 years ago, a settlement known today as Dra stood near the Dead Sea in what's modern-day Jordan. The people who lived there built circular structures with raised floors, so air could pass below them, helping to keep moisture away from the food placed inside. Now, archaeologists believed these buildings were granaries. They appeared before fully domesticated grain became common in the region. Storage wasn't simply a reward that arrived after farming. Now, in some places, people were building permanent systems for keeping wild food before agriculture had even fully taken shape. They'd found a way to carry abundance from one season into another. Now just picture what that would change inside of a household. Because a good harvest no longer ended with a feast or a pile of waste. Seeds could be dried, placed above ground, protected from water, and saved. Nuts could be gathered when they were common and eaten when the landscape offered much less. Meat could be dried or smoked. Animals could be kept alive and harvested later. A tool could be stored near a permanent home instead of carried across every single mile. For the first time, effort performed in 1 month could continue serving a family many months later. Now, this was the first great wealth mechanism. Surplus allowed work to survive through time. A household with a full store had choices that an empty household just simply did not. It could remain in place during a bad week. It could feed an injured adult. It could care for a child without sending every capable person out to search for food. It could spend several days repairing a roof, making a stronger tool, or clearing land for the next season. The food inside that storage therefore held more than just calories. No, it held future time. And that time could also be traded. A family with grain to spare could exchange some of it for stone, animal skins, labor, information, or, honestly, they could exchange it for loyalty. It could help another household through a shortage and expect help from them later on. It could host a larger feast, strengthen relationships, and increase its standing inside of the group. The family that could afford to give food away was showing everyone that it had passed beyond immediate need. And this might be one of the oldest roots of status. A large feast looked generous, but generosity required a base of stored resources to even get started. The host, they gained allies, while the guests, they consumed the evidence of the host's success. And storage also changed how people experienced risk. Without reserves, a failed hunt was an emergency, right? But with reserves, it became a loss that could be absorbed. A family no longer had to accept every bad bargain offered during a desperate week. It could wait. It could afford to wait. The first wealthy person probably owned no gold whatsoever. That person owned enough food to wait while somebody else had to act. Now, waiting sounds passive until one side cannot afford it. The person with stored food can refuse an exchange, delay a journey, or choose better conditions. But the hungry person faces a shrinking set of options with every passing day. Now, the difference between them might begin as a few baskets of grain, but over time, that can become a difference in power. And this is where security and inequality begin growing from the same invention. Once food can be stored, someone must decide where it sits and who might be able to open that door. A store can belong to a household, a larger family, or the entire settlement, and each arrangement creates a very different kind of society. Shared storage spreads risk across the group. Private storage gives individual households more control, and central storage gives power to whoever manages it. The design of early granaries reveals part of this change. At Dra, the earliest known granaries stood between other buildings, where the community could reach them. In later settlements, storage increasingly moved inside of homes. Food was becoming attached to households. The wall around the grain was also becoming a line around ownership. And that line changed the relationship between neighbors. A person could now look across the settlement and see that another family had more. A full store could survive long enough to be compared with an empty one. Success became visible after the harvest ended. Stored wealth could also be inherited. A skilled hunter could pass knowledge down to a child, but the animals they killed were soon gone. A granary, a flock, a durable tool, or a permanent building could remain. Children could begin life protected by work completed before they were even born. Now, families had always passed down skills, relationships, and social standing, but surplus added physical resources to that inheritance. One generation could leave the next generation with a head start that could be measured, guarded, and expanded. The same store that protected a family also, attracted danger. Because grain could be stolen, livestock could be driven away, a building could be seized. Surplus made organized theft worthwhile because value now sat in one place. Anyone who accumulated resources needed stronger walls, trusted allies, or someone prepared to fight. Protection soon became another source of power. A household able to defend several stores, they might begin protecting those of its neighbors. Payment could come in grain, labor, or obedience. The person with the strongest store could gain influence, while the person with the strongest weapons, they could gain a claim on the store. Surplus also made specialization possible. If every adult must search for food every day, very few people could ever spend years learning another craft. A stable food supply can support a builder, a potter, healer, a guard, priest, or an administrator. Their work might help the settlement to produce and protect even more. The community grows more capable, but it also grows more dependent on exchange between people performing different roles. And this is the point where wealth begins changing society around it. A reserve supports specialists. Specialists improve tools and buildings. Better tools increase production. Higher production creates larger reserves. Each step makes the next one easier. The cycle also works in reverse, too. A household with no reserve can't easily remove a worker from food production. It has less room to experiment and less protection against failure. Scarcity consumes the time that could have been used to escape it. Now, more than 10,000 years later, this mechanism still feels pretty familiar. Emergency savings allow someone to leave a dangerous job. Business reserves keep employees paid during a weak month. Investment capital gives a company time to build before it earns a profit. Surplus, it expands the distance between a decision and the moment survival forces an answer. The container has changed, but the advantage is not. Storage gave human beings a way to preserve value. Yet, wild plants and migrating animals still placed a limit on how much could be collected. A larger store needed a more reliable flow of food. Across several parts of the world, communities began producing that flow themselves. The granary taught people how to carry wealth through time, but agriculture would attach that wealth to the ground. Chapter 2. Agriculture invents the rich. Now, the first farmers, they accepted a difficult bargain because growing food demanded months of work before anyone could eat the result. Land had to be cleared and seeds had to be planted, young plants needed care, water had to reach the field, animals, insects, strangers, and bad weather could destroy everything before harvest. Now, hunting and gathering carried risks, but movement offered an escape. When one area became poor, a group could search somewhere else, but a field could not follow its owner. Farming tied people to a place, then made their survival depend on what happened there. The reward was concentration. A productive field could create far more food in one location than a family could gather by moving through the surrounding land. Grain could be dried, counted, divided, and stored. Livestock could turn grass into meat, milk, hides, and future animals. Permanent buildings could protect tools and harvests. Each season added something to the same location. For a more mobile community, possessions had to travel. For a farming household, possessions could definitely accumulate, though. The field therefore became more than soil. It became a machine that produced food every year. Now, its output did depend on rain, labor, seed, knowledge, and luck, but control of the field gave a household a claim on the harvest before the first stalk appeared, and that claim changed the meaning of ownership. A spear has one user at a time. A field can organize the work of an entire family. A large estate can organize the work of hundreds. The owner doesn't need to perform every task to benefit from the result. Other people could clear, plant, weed, irrigate, guard, and harvest that land. Ownership determines who keeps the final share. The harvest created an income stream that could belong to someone who'd never touched the crop. This is the earliest form of wealth that a modern investor would recognize immediately. A productive asset generates repeated output. Access to that asset can be granted in exchange for rent, labor, or part of the production. The asset remains after the payment is collected and may produce again the following year. Once communities depended on fields, access to fertile ground shaped almost everything around them. Land determined how many people could be fed. Food supported the builders, soldiers, priests, and rulers. A larger population could clear more fields and defend a wider area. A wider area could support an even larger population. Families now had a reason to mark boundaries and remember them. A tree, a stone, ditch, stream, or a wall could separate one claim from another. Those boundaries turned the landscape into a record of power. Someone walking through the settlement could see which household controlled the largest field, the best water, or the most livestock. The location of land mattered just as much as its size. A small plot beside reliable water could outperform any larger, dry field. Control of an irrigation channel could influence every farm below it. The person who decided when water moved could affect who harvested and who watched months of work die in the sun. And this created a pattern that would return throughout history. The largest fortunes often formed around a bottleneck rather than the final product. Grain mattered, sure, but fertile land was limited. Land mattered, but water could be even more limited. Whoever controlled the scarce input gained influence over everyone who needed it. Agriculture also changed the value of labor, too. A large harvest arrived during a short part of the year and required many hands at once. One household might not have enough people. Neighbors could help one another, workers could be paid from the crop, or weaker families could work land held by stronger ones. Debt could begin with something as ordinary as seed. A family emerging from winter with an empty store still needed grain to plant. Another household might supply it, expecting more grain after harvest. If the crop succeeded, the debt could be paid. But if it failed, the amount might carry into the next season. The borrower now had to face the following harvest, with part of it already promised to somebody else. The field looked full, but some of those crops belonged to the past. And this made agricultural debt especially powerful. A hungry family could consume its seed and lose the next crop, or borrow and surrender part of its future. A bad season could therefore pull resources toward households with larger reserves. Those households could lend when prices were high, they could buy livestock from desperate neighbors, or take control of land when debts could not be paid. One failed harvest might be the weather, but several failed harvests could rearrange the ownership of a village. The consequences reach the next generation too. A child born into a household with fertile lands receives food, shelter, and productive capacity. Another child might inherit an obligation to work those fields. Their lives begin in the same village, but under very different conditions. And agriculture gave inheritance far greater economic weight. Wealth no longer depended only on personal strength, skill, or reputation. A person could receive an asset built and defended by ancestors. The field would keep producing while family stories turned its ownership into something that felt natural. Over enough generations, the original reason the family controlled more land could disappear. A successful harvest, a marriage, a debt, an act of violence, or a decision made during a famine might be forgotten. That boundary remained, though. Archaeologists can't read the bank accounts of prehistoric households, so they often study houses. A larger home usually required more labor and material. It also offered more room for storage and activities. And across many ancient settlements, differences in house sizes provide a rough picture of how wealth was distributed. A major study published in Nature examined house sizes across dozens of archaeological sites in North America, Mesoamerica, Europe, and Asia. It found that inequality generally rose after plants became domesticated. In parts of Eurasia, the gap became much larger as societies gained large domesticated animals, stronger states, and systems that allowed the land and wealth to concentrate across generations. The story was not identical everywhere, though. Some farming societies limited accumulation through shared land, social rules, or frequent movement. Others developed deep divisions between large owners and families with little control over the ground they worked. Agriculture created the conditions for lasting inequality, but institutions decided how far it could go. Now, where accumulation continued, the village began to change shape. Some homes gained larger stores. Some families controlled more animals. Certain graves received valuable objects, while others received little. Buildings used for rituals or administration grew beyond anything that one household could construct. Surplus was moving toward the center. That movement could begin voluntarily. A community might pool grain for drought, festivals, defense, irrigation work, or support the people who could not farm. Shared resources helped large groups to survive shocks that would ruin a single family. But someone still had to measure the contributions, protect the store, and decide when to open it. So the manager of a common store held a delicate kind of power. During a good year, the role might have looked administrative. But during a famine, it could decide who lived. Control over distribution could turn temporary authority into a permanent position. Religious institutions often became part of this arrangement too. A temple could serve as a sacred place, a storehouse, a workshop, and a center for organizing labor. Gifts to the gods entered buildings managed by people. Grain offered for divine protection could later feed workers, support ceremonies, or strengthen the institution receiving it. Political authority grew through similar channels here. A leader who organized irrigation or defense provided something the village needed. Households could contribute grain or labor in return. Over time, the contribution could become expected. What began as help for a shared project could harden into tribute. And the annual harvest made this possible because it arrived in a visible, measurable wave. Collectors didn't need to follow every farmer throughout the year. No, they needed to appear when the grain filled the threshing floors and stores. A share could be removed before the household consumed the rest. The land produced food, but it also produced a tax base. This allowed authority to grow beyond personal relationships. A respected elder could influence people who knew them. A system supported by regular harvests could pay guards, builders, messengers, and officials. Those people could extend authority across settlements whose residents had never met the person at the top. Agriculture had done something extraordinary. It increased the supply of food while making that food easier to locate, count, seize, and control. Mobile resources were pretty difficult to govern, though. Fields stayed where they were. Grain stores could be inspected, livestock could be counted, farmers could be found in the same place the next season. The stability that allowed families to build wealth also allowed institutions to extract it. By this point, a wealthy person could control land, livestock, stores, workers, or water. Yet, there was a limit to how far that control could reach. Memory became unreliable as settlements grew. Personal promises weakened across distance. A ruler could claim a portion of every harvest, but someone needed to remember which household had delivered grain and which still owed it. Power had accumulated more information than the human mind could hold. So the next form of wealth would be built from marks in clay. Chapter 3. Kings turn wealth into a system. Now, sometime around 3300 BCE, in the city of Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, someone pressed a reed into wet clay and recorded an economic fact. The mark might have represented barley, livestock, oil, cloth, a worker, or a number. It didn't preserve a heroic speech. It didn't tell a love story. No, the earliest tablets from the region mostly dealt with goods, labor, and administration. Writing entered the historical record, carrying an account. Uruk had grown far beyond the scale of a farming village. Fields and irrigation networks supported a dense population. Workshops produced textiles, pottery, and other goods. Large institutions gathered resources and employed workers. Grains moved into central stores, then moved out again as rations and payments. Thousands of exchanges passed through a system with no spreadsheets, no banknotes, or printed receipts. A spoken promise could disappear. An official could forget a number or change it. A worker could insist that a ration had never arrived. A storekeeper could claim that missing grain had already been distributed. But clay gave the institution a memory. Before full writing developed, people in the region used small clay tokens to represent quantities of goods. Tokens could be sealed inside clay containers. Marks and seals could identify the people or institutions involved. And over time, the information moved onto the surface. Numbers and pictures were pressed or drawn directly into tablets. Now, this development, it took generations. The earliest signs didn't capture speech in the way that later writing would. They worked more like an accounting system. A symbol named a commodity. Another showed a quantity. A seal could connect the entry to an office or a person. And this small change transformed the scale of wealth. A ruler no longer needed to stand beside a field to claim part of its output. Officials could measure the harvest. Scribes could record what entered a storehouse. Seals could now show that a container had been inspected. Tablets could track rations, livestock, land, and labor, and information could move upward while grain moved toward the center. Records allowed a claim to survive distance. They also allowed it to survive disagreement. A farmer could forget a promise, but the tablet remained. An administrator could die, but the institution still held the account. A new official could continue collecting an old obligation from people they had never met. This gave institutional wealth an advantage over personal wealth. A powerful household might weaken after the death of its leader. A palace or temple could replace the person keeping the records and continue operating. Its claims lived inside of roles, routines, buildings, and archives. Wealth had begun to separate from the individual. The physical center of this system was often a monumental building. Temples and palaces stored grain, managed land, organized workshops, and supported labor. Their walls displayed religious and political authority, while the rooms behind those walls handled practical flows of food and materials. A farmer arriving with grain entered a world much larger than his household. Officials measured the delivery using standard units. A scribe recorded it. The grain joined another grain in a store that could feed workers, soldiers, servants, craftspeople, or people building canals and walls. And this concentration right here is what made cities possible. A person shaping metal or weaving cloth could receive food produced by someone else. A large construction project could support hundreds of workers because an institution collected and redistributed the output of distant fields. The city became a machine for coordinating strangers. The people at the center gained power from controlling the coordination. They could direct labor toward irrigation, defense, monuments, or even private comfort. They could decide which workshop received material and which group received rations. They could turn thousands of small contributions into one enormous project. A single farming household could build a wall around a home. A state could build a wall around a city. The system offered real benefits. Irrigation channels needed organized maintenance. Granaries could soften local shortages. Armed forces could protect fields and trade routes. Standards made exchange just easier. Specialized workers produced tools and knowledge that small households could not create alone. But, the same machinery could also take more than it returned. Once officials knew what land existed, what it produced, and who worked it, rulers could set regular demands. A contribution made during an emergency could become an annual tax. Labor offered for a shared canal could become compulsory service for a palace. Extraction became predictable, and predictable extraction could support permanent power. This altered the source of elite wealth. A large landowner collected from the people using his estate. A king could collect from landowners across the entire territory. His wealth came from a claim over the system surrounding production. The person planting barley worked in one field. The ruler's records touched thousands. That difference explains why effort and wealth began moving so far apart. The farmer's output was limited by land, weather, tools, and hours. But the ruler could increase revenue by adding another village to the record, another collector to the route, or another rule to the tax. Administrative reach created a form of leverage long before the word leverage ever existed. The state also changed what counted as wealth. Grain remained essential, of course, but a written claim on grain could begin to carry power of its own. A tablet might record that a household owed barley after harvest. The grain didn't yet exist, but the claim did. Wealth could now reach into the future. Debt had existed well before writing. Neighbors could lend seed, animals, food, or even labor and remember the obligation. But records made those obligations easier to standardize and enforce across larger groups. So interest could be measured, due dates could be remembered, old claims could survive the people who first made them. For the borrower, this created a dangerous split in time. And for the borrower, this creates a dangerous split in time, right? The next harvest looked like future income, but part of it already belonged to somebody else. A drought could leave the family simply unable to repay. The debt might grow, or payment could come from livestock, land, labor, or even members of the household. I mean, trust me, that stuff happened in the past. Ancient rulers understood that this process could become politically explosive. In parts of the ancient Near East, proclamations sometimes canceled certain personal debts and restored people who had fallen into debt bondage. Now, these acts were not so much a rejection of the system, rather than an attempt to stop it from consuming the farmers and soldiers the state needed. They needed those people in the fields, not in jail. Debt could concentrate wealth so effectively that rulers occasionally had to clear part of the board to keep the kingdom standing. And all of this brought about accounting, which also created a new kind of worker. The scribe didn't need to grow the grain, transport it, or guard the store. His value came from understanding the symbols that made the institution function. Literacy offered access to the control room of the early economy. A person who could read the account could see obligations hidden from everybody else. He knew which store was full, which field was assessed, which worker had been paid, and which village still owed grain. Information became a source of status because the system could no longer operate without people trained to manage it. Now, this is another pattern that survives into the present. As wealth systems grow more complex, the people who can describe, measure, and verify them, they're the ones who gain influence. Accountants, lawyers, bankers, analysts, and software engineers occupy the modern versions of that ancient position. They work with symbols that direct real resources. The symbols have become more abstract over the years, but the process remains physical somewhere. A number changes in an account, and a truck moves. A payment clears, and a worker enters a building. A loan is approved, and concrete begins pouring into a foundation. Uruk's clay tablets were early commands inside of that chain. Around 90% of the known texts from early Mesopotamia are administrative, which is kind of boring, but it is the truth. The surviving record is filled with quantities, goods, workers, and offices. Poetry and epic stories would come much, much later. Bureaucracy arrived early because growing institutions had an urgent problem to solve. They needed to know who controlled what and who owed what to whom. One tablet held by the Metropolitan Museum of Art dates back to roughly 3100 to 2900 BCE. It records malt and barley groats, probably distributed by a large temple. Now, this artifact is smaller than many modern phones, but within its markings sits an economy. Farmers produced the barley, workers processed it, officials directed it, and a scribe made the moment visible to the institution. The tablet itself had little nutritional value. No one could eat that clay, yet that clay helped to determine who could eat the barley. This was the final transformation of the first age of wealth. Storage allowed resources to survive time. Agriculture attached recurring production to land. Administration turned that production into a network of recorded claims. Each breakthrough expanded what a wealthy person could control. The keeper of a store controlled a reserve. The landowner controlled an annual harvest. The ruler controlled the rules deciding how thousands of harvests moved. And by then, wealth had become far larger than a pile of useful objects. It lived in boundaries, in obligations, offices, and records. It could pass through families and institutions. It could command labor from people far away. It could claim part of a crop before the seed ever entered the ground. The earliest fortunes were built from survival itself. Food was the central asset because everyone needed it, and nature could interrupt its supply. Land became valuable because it produced that food repeatedly. States became powerful because they could measure the production and take a share. Yet, land still trapped wealth in one place. A field could feed a city, but it could not be carried into another kingdom. A storehouse could hold grain, but grain was heavy, bulky, and vulnerable to rot. Recorded claims helped value move through a bureaucracy, although they depended on the institution that recognized them. Humanity had made wealth durable, productive, inheritable, and enforceable. But the next challenge was movement. To travel across empires, wealth needed a form that strangers could recognize, rulers would tax, soldiers could accept, and merchants could carry in a pocket. It needed money. Chapter 4. Money makes wealth portable. So at the end of the first age of wealth, the richest assets were pretty difficult to move. A field could feed hundreds of people, but it remained fixed on one patch of ground. Grain could be carried, although every sack was heavy and each journey risked water, insects, theft, and rot. Livestock could walk to market, but animals needed food and sometimes they died before arriving. Even precious metal created work. A trader receiving a lump of silver had to weigh it, test it, and decide whether the other person had mixed in something cheaper. Wealth had become durable and inheritable, but it still traveled pretty badly. People had traded for thousands of years without coins. They exchanged goods directly, kept accounts, gave gifts, extended credit, and used commodities such as grain, cattle, shells, silver, and cloth as measures of value. A village didn't need someone offering 3 goats for a chair every time 2 people wanted to trade. Much of the exchange happened between people who knew one another and could settle obligations later. Distance made that trust harder to maintain. A stranger at a market didn't know the quality of another stranger's silver. A soldier arriving in a new town couldn't easily pay with a promise from a commander hundreds of miles away. A ruler collecting taxes across a large territory needed a unit that officials could recognize and count. So the breakthrough came when a political authority placed its mark on metal. So around the late 7th century BCE, coins made from electrum appeared in Lydia, a kingdom in what is now Western Turkey. So electrum is a natural mix of gold and silver. Early pieces carried stamped designs, including the head of a lion. The stamp signaled that the piece came from an issuing authority and belonged to a known system of weight and value. Now, this coin didn't remove the need for trust, not at all. It moved trust away from the person offering the metal and toward the authority whose mark appeared on it. That transfer saved time. A merchant no longer had to begin every small exchange by cutting and weighing metal. Coins could be counted. Prices could be quoted on a shared unit. Payments could be divided into smaller pieces. A worker could receive a wage and spend it with someone who had never met the employer. Money made purchasing power easier to separate from the object that created it. A farmer could sell grain and receive coins. Those coins could later become tools, land, clothing, labor, or a passage on a ship. The value created in one field was no longer trapped inside of sacks of food. It had entered a form accepted for many other purposes. And this is where wealth became far more flexible. A landowner remained dependent on the place where his land sat. A person holding portable money could wait for another opportunity, move to another market, or divide the fortune across several uses. Money increased the number of doors that accumulated value could open. The Kingdom of Lydia had good reasons to welcome this system too. Its capital, Sardis, stood near important routes, linking the Aegean world with the interior of Anatolia. Now, the region also had access to gold from the sands of the Pactolus River. Trade brought strangers together, while metal gave the kingdom a valuable resource from which to create coins. Now, under King Croesus, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly because, look, I'm a human being, do my best over here. AI probably mispronounces more words than I do. Anyway, under King Croesus, who ruled during the 6th century BCE, Lydia produced separate gold and silver coinage of remarkable consistency. A surviving gold stater held by the Metropolitan Museum of Art weighs just over 8 grams. It's small enough to disappear inside of a closed hand, yet it could carry serious purchasing power across the market. This was wealth compressed. A storehouse needed walls and guards, a flock needed land and herders. Coins allowed a portion of that value to sit inside of a pouch. A person could leave home carrying the result of many harvests, without taking any of the harvest itself. Portability made wealth easier to hide, steal, tax, and spend. But every advantage, it arrived with a new vulnerability. A land seizure was visible. A pouch could vanish in a crowded street. A strongbox could be taken by soldiers. Money reduced the physical size of wealth, yes, but it increased the number of people who might be able to claim it. Rulers quickly discovered that coinage served the state as well as the market. An army created a huge coordination problem. Soldiers had to be fed and rewarded far from home. Grain could support them, but moving enough grain across long distances, it was slow and expensive. Of course it was. Coins allowed a ruler to send purchasing power with the army. Soldiers could then buy food, animals, and supplies from the regions they entered. The payment also helped to spread the currency around. A soldier received the ruler's coin, spent it with a local merchant, and the merchant needed the same coin to pay taxes. Military power, taxation, and markets began to reinforce one another. This gave rulers a new way to shape economic life. If taxes had to be paid in official currency, then households would need to obtain that currency. So they sold goods, labor, or land to people who held it. The state could create demand for its money by requiring the population to return some of it each year. Therefore, the stamp on a coin carried more than a promise about metal. It carried the reach of the authority behind it. As coinage spread through Greek cities, the Persian Empire, and later on Rome, designs made political power visible in daily trade. Gods, symbols, rulers, and victories appeared on objects that passed through thousands of hands. The currency reminded users which authority set the standard and collected the tax. And that authority also created temptation. The issuer could reduce the precious metal inside of a coin while asking people to accept the same face value. Ancient states sometimes debased currency to stretch their resources, especially when war placed pressure on the treasury. More coins could be produced from the same stock of silver or gold, allowing payments to continue for a while. But the short-term benefit could weaken the trust supporting the system. Kind of sounds like how the US printed a bunch of money during COVID. But anyway, moving on. Traders might raise prices, demand older coins, or weigh the metal again. A currency built to reduce negotiation could fall back into suspicion when the official stamp stopped settling the question. Money had made trade faster because people did less checking. But debasement, it made them check again. This reveals a deeper feature of currency, though. The material matters, yes, but acceptance matters more. A gold coin is useful only when someone else recognizes its value. An official coin works because people expect it to work in the next exchange. Each person accepts it partly because everyone else seems prepared to do the same. Money is, therefore, a social network disguised as an object. Its strength depends on the number of people, markets, and institutions connected to it. A coin accepted in one town has limited reach. A coin accepted across an empire can move food, labor, weapons, taxes, and influence through an enormous area. The wealthy gained a new advantage from this network. A surplus could be converted into a form that waited without needing to be fed. Land still produced income, workshops still made the goods, and workers still performed the labor. But money gave the owner a flexible claim on that production. And it also made fortunes easier to compare. A large estate and a fleet of ships were different things. Prices translated them into a common language, though. Once assets could be measured in the same unit, people could calculate gains, losses, debts, and opportunities with greater clarity. And that calculation, it changed behavior. A merchant could notice that copper sold for one price near a mine and at a higher price near a city that needed it. A farmer could compare the return from grain with the return from olives. A lender could place a price on waiting. Money made differences visible, and visible differences invited people to profit from them. And the largest fortunes would soon form around those differences. Money allowed value to travel, although the coin itself created no spice, silk, metal, or grain. Production still happened somewhere else. Demand waited somewhere else. Between them lay mountains, deserts, oceans, borders, languages, bandits, storms, and months of uncertainty. The next wealthy class learned to live inside of that gap. Chapter 5. Merchants profit from distance. A sack of pepper could begin its journey as an ordinary agricultural product and end it as a European luxury. The pepper had not become tastier while crossing the sea. Distance changed its economic position. It moved away from the place where supply was common and toward a market where buyers wanted it. Few sellers possessed it, and the route back to its source was long. The difference between those two prices belonged to the people who solved the journey. This is the central wealth mechanism of commerce. A merchant finds value trapped in one place and connects it with demand somewhere else. The profit pays for transport, risk, information, coordination, and the possibility that the entire plan fails. The work was much harder than placing goods on a cart and choosing a direction. Consider the routes that later grouped under the name the Silk Roads. No single merchant usually traveled from China to Rome carrying one piece of silk from beginning to end. No, that doesn't really make any sense. Goods passed through chains of markets and middlemen. A merchant might know one region, one language, and one section of the road. He sold to another person whose network began where his ended. At every step, the price could rise. Each merchant needed payment for capital tied up in the cargo, months spent traveling, guards hired, animals lost, bribes paid, and information gathered. The final buyer was purchasing the object and every dangerous mile behind it. And there would have been many. This made knowledge just as valuable as transport. A merchant needed to know where grain had failed, which city was preparing for war, which ruler had raised a toll, which port had closed, and where a new fashion had changed demand. News moved slowly, so an information advantage could last weeks, even months. A trader arriving with knowledge of a shortage could buy before prices adjusted. One letter from a trusted partner could be worth more than another wagon of cargo. The merchant's real asset was often the network that produced those letters. Now, across Central Asia, Sogdian merchants built communities along major trade routes. They came from a region centered around cities such as Samarkand and developed commercial links stretching toward China and westward across Asia. Their strength came partly from people who shared language, customs, family ties, and reputation while living far apart. A merchant leaving home could find partners in distant settlements. Those partners knew local officials, prices, routes, and risks. They could store goods, arrange animals, introduce buyers, and carry messages. Formal law remained uneven across borders, but relationships could continue where one government's authority ended. Trust reduced the cost of distance. Without trusted partners, every exchange required more inspection, more guards, more cash, and more fear. A dishonest agent could disappear with the cargo. A distant buyer could refuse payment. Courts might offer little help to a foreigner. Reputation became a private enforcement system. A merchant known for breaking promises could lose access to the entire network. A merchant who honored them could receive goods on credit, enter new markets, and form partnerships without rebuilding trust from the beginning. Good behavior increased the number of people willing to do business with them. And this gave diaspora communities an important commercial role in many parts of history. People living outside of their place of origin often remained connected to relatives and partners across several cities. Those relationships allowed information, goods, and credit to move across political boundaries. And this pattern appears in the letters preserved in the Cairo Genzia, a store of discarded Jewish documents found in a synagogue in Old Cairo. Among religious texts and personal papers were letters, contracts, and accounts created by merchants operating around the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean worlds during the medieval period. The documents describe a commercial world held together by correspondence. Merchants asked partners to sell goods, collect debts, purchase cargo, handle disputes, and care for visiting associates. A person in one port could act through someone they trusted in another. The network extended the merchants' reach beyond the distance their body could travel. And this was an early form of scale. A craftsman expanded by making more objects. A merchant expanded by adding more reliable connections. Each new partner opened access to another set of suppliers, buyers, and information. This network became more useful as it grew. Sea trade increased the rewards and the danger. Across the Indian Ocean, merchants learned to work with monsoon winds. Seasonal changes could carry ships in one direction during part of the year and help to bring them back months later. Ports along East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and China became parts of a connected commercial world. The wind created a structure that no merchant could negotiate. Miss the season, and the cargo might have to wait for months. Arrive at the right moment, and a ship could cross distances that would have been far harder against the prevailing wind. Profit depended on timing just as much as price. And the cargo also needed to match the market. Ceramics might move toward buyers who valued their quality. Horses traveled toward regions where military demand made them expensive. Textiles, spices, metals, ivory, timber, and precious stores crossed between economies with different resources and tastes. The merchant didn't need to invent these differences. Geography, climate, culture, and scarcity had already created them. The merchant's job was to see where the gap was large enough to pay for closing it. And that gap could be enormous for luxury goods. A small volume of spice or silk carried high enough value relative to its weight, making it better suited to expensive and dangerous travel. Cheap, bulky goods couldn't always absorb that transport cost. Therefore, long-distance trade favored products that buyers wanted badly and couldn't obtain nearby. Scarcity grew as the source moved out of sight. A wealthy buyer in Venice couldn't visit the place where pepper grew and negotiate with the farmer. No, he saw the final seller and a cargo that had survived a chain of voyages. Limited supply made that object a sign of access. Serving rare spices displayed the host's ability to reach beyond the local economy. And merchants converted that desire into fortunes. Venice offered one of the clearest examples of this. Its location in a lagoon gave the city protection and access to the Adriatic Sea. Venetian merchants built links with Byzantine, Islamic, and European markets. Ships carried goods in and out while warehouses, contracts, officials, and naval power supported the flow. The city became wealthy by controlling passage between worlds that wanted what the other side possessed. Its merchants required more than just courage. They needed systems. Cargo had to be inspected and stored. Ships needed crews and repairs. Contracts had to divide gains and losses. Public authorities protected routes, negotiated privileges, and sometimes used force to preserve commercial access. Private wealth and state power began moving together. Merchants supplied taxes, loans, and ships. The state supplied protection, rules, and privileged entry into markets. A successful trade network could finance military strength, while military strength defended the network. This made control of routes almost as valuable as control of land. A landowner collected from production inside of a territory. A commercial city collected from movement passing through it. Ports charged fees. Markets charged rents. Governments imposed custom duties. Warehouses earned from storage. Money changers earned from conversion. Many fortunes formed around the cargo without anyone producing the object inside of it. Movement created an economy around movement. The merchant still faced a brutal problem, though. A single failure could erase years of gains. A ship might sink. Pirates could seize it, and not in some kind of Disney way. War could close a port. A ruler could confiscate foreign property. Prices could collapse before the cargo ever arrived. But news of disaster traveled much slower than the disaster itself, and this uncertainty limited the size of any venture. A merchant who placed his whole fortune on one ship could become rich in a season and poor in an afternoon. Partnership offered one answer, though. Several investors could contribute capital to a voyage and divide the result. So the loss of one ship, it would hurt each person without destroying all of them. A traveling merchant could contribute labor, while a partner at home supplied money. Contracts defined who carried the risk and who received the profit. Insurance would later turn parts of that risk into a price. Before mature insurance markets, diversification and partnerships already helped merchants to survive uncertainty. A fortune spread across cargoes, routes, and associates had more chances to remain alive, and this changed the kind of person who could participate. A voyage no longer had to be funded by one person rich enough to buy the ship and the cargo. No, several pools of money could meet around the same opportunity. Commerce was learning to gather capital before the corporation existed. But the greatest advantage still belonged to merchants with reliable information and trusted names. Reputation has always been important. A newcomer needed cash because strangers had little reason to trust them. An established merchant, though, could receive goods today and promise payment after selling them. Reputation reduced the amount of metal required to keep trade moving. At that point, the merchant's name began functioning like money. A promise accepted in several cities could move value without a wagon of coins. One partner wrote to another. A balance was entered into a ledger. An obligation in one market could be settled against an obligation somewhere else. The cargo continued to travel, but the money could stay behind. And this was the opening that credit had been waiting for. Merchants had learned to profit from geographic distance. Bankers would profit from the distance between today and tomorrow. Chapter 6. Credit lets wealth travel through time. In medieval Europe, moving a chest of coins was expensive, slow, and very dangerous. The chest added weight to a journey and advised its value to every thief along the road. Coins from one city might need to be weighed or exchanged in another. A merchant who sent metal across borders risked losing the payment before the trade ever began. Commercial networks, they found a better method, though. The coin could remain in one place while a written claim traveled instead. A merchant in Florence might give local currency to a banker and receive a document payable through the bank's partner in another city. and the merchant carried the paper rather than the metal. At the destination, the partner paid according to the terms of the agreement, often in another currency and at a later date. This family of instruments became known through bills of exchange. Now, the details varied across time and place, but the central mechanism was pretty simple. The obligation in one city could create purchasing power in another. Trust had become portable. The paper had little value to someone outside of the network. Its power came from the names written on it and the expectation that those names would honor the promise. The real power came from the names written on it and the expectation that those names would honor the promise. A respected banking house could make a piece of paper useful across borders because partners believed the institution would still exist when payment became due. And this allowed money to move at the speed of information rather than the speed of metal. Ledgers made the system even more efficient, too. If one merchant owed a banker in Florence and another was due money in Venice, the banks could adjust accounts and settle only the remaining difference. Hundreds of transactions didn't require hundreds of chests moving back and forth anymore. Written entries allowed obligations to cancel one another. And the modern economy still rests on this idea today. When money moves between bank accounts, physical cash usually goes nowhere. Institutions change records, compare obligations, and settle balances internally. The interface is digital, but the logic would be very familiar to a medieval merchant. Credit added another layer here. A banker could provide purchasing power before the borrower possessed the full amount. A merchant preparing a voyage needed money for goods, transport, wages, food, and fees. The profit would arrive only after the cargo was sold, perhaps many months later. Waiting until every coin had been saved could mean losing the opportunity. A loan pulled part of the expected future profit into the present. The banker sold time. The borrower received the ability to act today. In return, the lender received a claim on tomorrow. Interest paid for waiting, risk, and the possibility that repayment would never arrive. This mechanism right here allowed economic activity to begin before all of the necessary capital had been accumulated. A workshop could buy more material before selling its next batch. A landowner could improve the estate before the next harvest. A merchant could finance several cargoes instead of waiting for each voyage to return. Credit increased speed. It also increased fragility. The future remained uncertain even when a contract placed a number on it. A ship could sink. A harvest could fail. A ruler could refuse to pay. A borrower still owed money after the event that was supposed to produce it had disappeared. Debt therefore connected separate failures. Without borrowing, a lost cargo ruined the owner of that cargo. But with borrowing, the loss also reached the lender and anyone depending on repayment. Credit helped fortunes to grow across a network, then allowed trouble to travel through the same connections. Renaissance banking families lived inside of this tension. The Medici Bank began in Florence in 1397 under Giovanni de' Medici de' Medici. Did I say that right? I hope I said that right. Anyway, the bank grew through branches and partnerships in important European cities, including Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, and London at different points in its history. Each branch handled local businesses while remaining tied to a larger family network. The structure helped the bank to move funds and information across Europe. A merchant could deal with a familiar name in several markets. Church revenues could be collected in distant regions and transferred toward Rome through accounts and bills. Foreign currencies could be exchanged while credit linked payment dates across cities. The Medici fortune was built from access to flows, rather than piles of coins sitting in Florence. Information moved through these flows. The bank's correspondence revealed who needed money, which ruler faced trouble, where exchange rates had shifted, and which merchants could be trusted. Financial relationships created political knowledge, and political knowledge improved financial decisions. Banking turned proximity to powerful clients into a power of its own. A ruler preparing for war often needed more money than taxes could provide immediately. Soldiers and suppliers demanded payment now, while tax revenue would arrive later. So credit allowed the ruler to spend future income in the present. For the lender, royal businesses promised scale and influence. A loan to a ruler could be far larger than a loan to a workshop. It might bring access, privileges, or control over valuable revenue. But it could also become a disaster if the ruler lost a war, rejected the debt, or decided the banker had become inconvenient. The crown held a sword, the contract did not. This made sovereign lending one of the most profitable and dangerous businesses in finance. Banking families could rise by funding governments and fall when those governments failed to pay. A lender gained a claim on future taxes, but enforcing that claim against a king required more than just careful accounting. So credit shifted power in both directions. The borrower gained resources before earning them. The lender gained influence over decisions that produced repayment. A merchant with a loan had to consider the bank. A ruler dependent on finance had to consider the families and the markets willing to provide it. This is where financial wealth begins to stand beside land and trade as separate sources of power. The banker didn't need to own every field or sail on every ship. It didn't even need to own one field or one ship. No, the banker owned claims connected to the people who did have ownership. One loan linked them to a harvest. Another linked them to a voyage. Another linked them to taxes collected across a kingdom. Their portfolio was a map of other people's futures. The strongest banking networks could choose which futures received support. A promising merchant gained the capital to expand. Another remained small. A ruler found enough money to continue a war, but his opponents did not. Credit did more than just predict the future here. No, it helped to decide which version of the future had enough funding to occur. And that choice required judgment. Ledgers showed past behavior. Correspondence supplied news, and personal relationships revealed character. A banker had to decide whether a borrower was capable, whether the plan made sense, and whether the wider political world would remain stable long enough for repayment. Finance placed a price on confidence. A trusted borrower paid less and gained more time. A doubtful borrower faced harsher terms and received nothing. Therefore, reputation, it affected the cost of opportunity. The person already connected to respected institutions could act with borrowed resources, while the outsider had to build capital all alone. And this created another way for advantage to compound. Successful repayment improves access to future credit, and better access funded larger ventures. Larger ventures created greater profits and stronger relationships. One completed promise made the next promise more valuable. But failure could compound just as quickly. A missed payment damaged trust. Suppliers demanded cash, partners withdrew. A temporary shortage became a collapse because the network stopped accepting the person's future. Credit made wealth depend on belief about what came next. And that very same principle now sits inside of mortgages, business loans, bonds, credit cards, and venture financing. A mortgage gives someone a home today in exchange for years of future income. A company issues bonds to build capacity before that capacity produces revenue. An investor funds a young business because future profits may justify present spending. Every case brings tomorrow into the room. The change created by credit was larger than the loan itself. Before credit, growth depended heavily on accumulated surplus. A person saved first and expanded later. Credit allowed expansion to begin earlier, using expected production as support. And this shortened the time between an idea and its execution. It also gave people with capital a claim on growth they didn't personally create. The lender supplied purchasing power and received repayment from the borrower's work, land, trade, or taxes. Financial wealth could grow by sitting above many different forms of production. The ancient landowner claimed part of a harvest because they controlled the field. The banker claimed part of the harvest because they financed the seed, the tools, or the person who owned the field. Control had moved up another level. By the end of the medieval commercial era, wealth could travel in several forms. Coins moved purchasing power between strangers. Merchant networks moved goods and information between distant markets. Credit moved future income into present hands. Each system reduced one kind of friction and created a new center of power. The mint controlled the standard. The merchant controlled the route. The banker controlled access to time. Yet the largest ventures were becoming too expensive and too dangerous for one merchant, one family, or one bank. Ocean voyages required ships, crews, weapons, supplies, and years of patience. Mines and large workshops demanded more capital. Overseas trade could produce extraordinary returns, sure, but a single storm or war could destroy the entire investment. Now, partnerships did spread out some of the risk. Banking networks gathered more money, but neither solution could yet bring thousands of investors into the same venture while allowing ownership to move between them. The next breakthrough would turn a business into something that could outlive its founders, divide itself into pieces, and collect capital from people who never met. Credit allowed wealth to travel through time, but the corporation would allow it to organize at scale. Chapter 7. The Corporation Creates Collective Power. In 1598, a fleet of Dutch ships returned to Amsterdam after 14 months at sea. The vessels carried pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and other goods from Asia. For the merchants who had financed the expedition, the cargo proved that the journey could produce extraordinary profits. It also showed the size of the problem standing between Europe and those profits. A voyage to Asia demanded ships, crews, weapons, food, trade goods, and enough cash to keep the entire operation alive for years. Storms could scatter the fleet, disease could empty a deck, rivals could seize the cargo. A ship might leave with several fortunes inside of it and never appear on the horizon ever again. Medieval partnerships had helped merchants divide risk, but many of those arrangements ended after one voyage. Investors contributed money, the ship traveled, the cargo was sold, and the partnership settled its accounts. Anyone financing the next expedition had to gather the capital again. And this limited the scale of the operation. A merchant could spread money across several voyages, although every project still depended on an agreement between a small group of people. Death, disagreement, or bankruptcy could pull the arrangement apart. The solution was an organization with a life of its own. In 1602, the Dutch government combined several competing trading groups into the Dutch East India Company, known by its Dutch initials VOC. Investors supplied capital and received shares in the enterprise. The company could use its pooled money across a continuing series of voyages, instead of closing after each fleet returned. Now that change gave capital permanence. An investor could sell a share to somebody else, while the ships, warehouses, contracts, employees, and trading posts remained under the same organization. Owners could enter and leave without forcing the enterprise to end. The company became more stable than the group of human beings who happened to own it at any moment. This was the corporation's great advantage. It separated the life of an organization from the lives of its owners. A family fortune could break apart through inheritance. A partnership could dissolve after an argument. But a corporation could continue signing contracts, owning property, borrowing money, and employing people while shareholders died and directors changed. It had no childhood, no old age, and no natural date of death written into its body. Human beings had created an economic entity that could outlive them. The company also allowed many fortunes to act as one. An investor who could never finance an Asian fleet alone could own a small part of the enterprise. Hundreds of contributions became ships, forts, warehouses, soldiers, clerks, and cargo. The corporation gave scattered capital a single direction. Pooled ownership changed the size of people's projects. The wealthy no longer needed to control an entire venture just to profit from it. A person could own a fraction, receive a fraction of the result, and place the rest of the fortune elsewhere. The share transformed ownership into something divisible and transferable, and this made investment more flexible. A warehouse couldn't easily be cut into hundreds of pieces and sold to strangers, but a legal claim on the company could. The physical assets stayed together while the rights of their profits moved between investors. Amsterdam soon developed an active market for VOC shares. Buyers and sellers negotiated prices based on expected voyages, cargoes, wars, and company decisions. Wealth could now grow or shrink because the market changed its opinion about future profits, even while the ship remained at sea. The future had acquired a price. That market created liquidity, which solved another problem facing large ventures. An investor might need money years before the company's assets could be sold, but transferable shares offered a way out. The investor could sell the claim to another buyer without asking the company to dismantle a warehouse or bring a fleet home. Long-lived assets became easier to finance because ownership no longer had to remain locked inside of them for the same length of time. Liquidity also invited speculation, though. A buyer could purchase shares with little interest in spices or ships, hoping another person would later pay more. Rumors about cargoes and wars moved prices before anyone knew the final result. The company organized physical trade across oceans, while the share market organized expectations around that trade inside Amsterdam. The VOC also reveals how different the early corporation was from an ordinary private business. The Dutch government granted a monopoly over Dutch trade in Asian waters east of the Cape of Good Hope. The company could make treaties, build forts, maintain armed forces, wage war, and administer territory. Its charter joined private capital with public power. Investors wanted profitable cargo. The company pursuing that cargo could use violence normally associated with a state. It negotiated with rulers, attacked rivals, controlled ports, and forced communities into trading systems designed around its own advantage. This was commercial scale, backed by cannon. The spice trade showed how the incentive worked. Nutmeg, clove, and mace grew in limited parts of Southeast Asia and commanded high prices in Europe. If the company could restrict supply and control the route, it could preserve the difference between the buying price in Asia and the selling price in Europe. Competition threatened that margin, though. Local producers could sell to other merchants. Rival European companies could offer better terms. The VOC therefore pursued exclusive agreements and destroyed competing sources of supply. In the Banda Islands, its campaign to control nutmeg culminated in mass killing, forced removal, and enslavement in 1621. The violence was connected directly to the wealth mechanism. Monopoly profits required control over who could grow the product, who could buy it, and where it could travel. Human freedom stood in the way of that control. The corporation allowed investors in Europe to receive gains from acts performed thousands of miles away. A shareholder didn't need to stand on a ship, negotiate in a port, or witness the violence used to protect the trade. Legal ownership connected the investor to the profit, while distance concealed much of the process that produced it. And this became one of the corporation's darker powers. It could divide action across so many employees, offices, agents, and territories that responsibility became difficult to locate. A director approved a policy, an official passed an order, a commander enforced it, and a shareholder received a return. No single person carried the whole machine, yet the machine moved. The English East India Trading Company followed a similar path on an even larger political stage. It began with a royal charter in 1600 and pursued trade across Asia. Over time, it gained military and territorial power in India. After the victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and further political changes, the company secured the right to collect revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa in 1765. A business formed to buy and sell goods had become a government. Collecting taxes from millions of people. Revenue from the territory could support armies and administration. Those armies could expand control, which created access to more revenue. Corporate power began financing its own growth through the people placed under it. The arrangement, it also distorted accountability too. Company officials answered to directors and investors seeking returns, while the people affected by their decisions had little influence over the owners in London. The incentives of a trading business sat inside of the machinery of government. Famine, extraction, corruption, and violence eventually produced outrage in Britain as well as in India. Parliament tightened control over the company through a series of laws and charter renewals. Its commercial monopolies were gradually removed, and after the uprising of 1857, the British Crown took direct control of India in 1858. The company lost its empire, but the corporate form continued to spread. Its usefulness extended far beyond colonial trade. Canals, banks, mines, insurance ventures, factories, and railways all required more capital than many individuals wanted to risk alone. A company could collect money from several owners, hold assets under one legal name, and continue operating while ownership changed. Limited liability later made this arrangement even more attractive. Under full personal liability, a failed enterprise could reach beyond the amount invested and consume an owner's other property. Limited liability placed a boundary around the loss. An investor could lose the money committed to the company without automatically losing the rest of the fortune. And that boundary encouraged more people to supply capital to risky projects. It also separated reward from responsibility. Owners could receive unlimited upside while their direct financial loss remained capped. Creditors, workers, communities, and governments might absorb damage exceeding the capital shareholders had placed at risk. The legal design determined where the failure landed. Modern public companies, pension funds, index funds, and retirement accounts still depend on the ability to divide ownership into shares. Millions of people can own a small claim on the same factory, office, software, patents, and networks. But few shareholders know the other owners, and none of them need to manage the entire business personally. The corporation turned ownership into a system. It also created a permanent conflict between owners and managers. Shareholders supplied capital, while directors controlled information and made daily decisions. But an owner holding a small fraction of the company could do little alone if the managers wasted money or enriched themselves. Corporate governance grew from the need to monitor people spending resources that belonged partly to strangers. Boards, audits, voting rights, financial reports, and shareholder meetings developed around this problem. Each tool tried to keep control connected to ownership after the two had separated. The structure made scale possible, then required another structure to stop the people running it from treating pooled wealth as their own. This changed the route to wealth. Earlier fortunes often grew through direct control of land, ships, or loans. But corporate ownership allowed a person to place capital inside of an organization that coordinated other people's work. The owner could participate in several enterprises at once, while professional managers directed daily operations. The organization gained access to more capital than one household could provide, and the capital gained access to more labor than one owner could supervise. And by the 18th century, this new structure was ready to meet a second force. Companies could gather enormous pools of money, but much of the production still moved at the speed of hands, animals, wind, and water. A spinning wheel remained limited by the person operating it. A mine flooded faster than workers could remove the water. A workshop grew by adding more benches and more bodies. But corporations solved the problem of organizing capital. The machine would multiply what the capital could produce. Chapter 8. Machines replaced land as the main source of new wealth. For thousands of years, economic output remained tied to biological limits. A farmer could work on only so many acres. An ox could pull only so much weight. A weaver could move their hands across a loom for only so many hours at a time. Production could improve through better tools and organization, although the energy still came mainly from muscles, flowing water, moving air, and burning wood. Land sat at the center of this system because land captured sunlight and turned it into crops, timber, and food for animals. A large estate produced more because it controlled more soil and supported more labor. The old ruling class built its wealth around acres. Industrialization shifted that center toward machinery, fuel, and capital. And this change became very visible inside textile production. Before the factory, spinning and weaving often took place in homes and small workshops. A merchant supplied raw fiber, households performed part of the work, and finished cloth moved back through the commercial network. Output was spread across villages and limited by the speed of individual workers. But demand for cloth kept growing. Merchants wanted more thread than spinners could supply. Inventors and manufacturers responded with machines that allowed fewer workers to handle more spindles and looms. The spinning jenny, water frame, spinning mule, and power loom arrived through a series of inventions and improvements during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Now, each machine changed a particular step, but together they moved textile production away from scattered homes and toward buildings filled with equipment. The factory gathered the entire process in one place. Machines needed power, maintenance, supervision, and a steady flow of material. Workers had to arrive at set hours because the equipment couldn't organize itself around the rhythm of each household. So the building, the machine, and the clock began shaping the workday. And this created a different relationship between labor and ownership. A craft worker owned tools and carried knowledge in skilled hands. A factory worker entered a production system owned by someone else. A machine determined the pace, divided the task, and made the worker easier to replace. The valuable skill had moved into the equipment and the process surrounding it. The factory owner didn't need to spin every thread. Capital purchased machines, buildings, fuel, and raw cotton. Workers operated the system for wages. The owner kept what remained after the costs were all paid. Machinery multiplied labor while giving the owner a claim on the multiplication. Water provided power for many early mills, which tied factories to fast rivers. Steam loosened that limit. Early steam engines were used to pump water from mines. James Watt's separate condenser, patented in 1769, made the engine far more fuel efficient. According to the Science Museum, engines using his design burned about 2/3 less coal than earlier versions. That improvement allowed steam power to spread beyond mines into mills, workshops, breweries, and factories. A manufacturer no longer needed the ideal stretch of a river. A factory could stand closer to workers, coal, ports, or customers. Energy became portable enough to recognize geography. Coal made the shift possible because it stored ancient energy inside the ground. A seam of coal represented forests and plants compressed across geological time. Burning it released power far beyond the annual flow of wood a nearby landscape could easily provide. The industrial economy began consuming energy accumulated over millions of years. And this broke an old ceiling. Before the Industrial Revolution, economic growth remained slow enough that the Bank of England estimates an economy growing at the average pre-1750 rate would need about 6,000 years to double. At the average rate since 1750, the doubling time falls to roughly 50 years. Humanity had entered an economy where one generation could inhabit a material world very different from the one inherited by its parents. Factories produced larger quantities at lower unit costs. Cloth that once required long hours of skilled work became available to wider groups of buyers. Iron, tools, household goods, and later countless other products followed the same direction. Industrial wealth therefore carried a contradiction. Owners accumulated vast fortunes, while ordinary people gained access to goods earlier generations would have considered expensive. Cheaper products entered the market. A manufacturer serving only the wealthy faced a limited number of customers. A factory lowering the price could sell to entire cities. Higher volume justified larger machines, and larger machines lowered the cost again. Scale created its own demand for more scale. And the economics of the factory made this pressure stronger. A large machine will cost money before it produced the first item. But once installed, every additional unit could spread that fixed cost across more output. A small producer might make an excellent product and still lose because the larger factory sold an acceptable version for less. Competition, therefore, moved away from skill alone. Access to capital, fuel, machinery, supply contracts, and distribution become part of the contest. The factory owner entered each new day with expensive equipment already working in their favor, while the independent craft worker began again and again with the same pair of hands. The gains were distributed unevenly. Factory owners controlled the assets producing the new output. Workers owned their labor and depended on wages. During early industrialization, labor was abundant, legal protections were weak, and growing cities filled with families needing income. Employers could extend hours and hold wages down because another worker often waited outside the gate. Children entered mines and factories because small bodies could perform certain tasks and poor households needed every possible wage. Injuries, polluted air, crowded housing, and disease became part of the price paid for rapid production. The machine increased the value of ownership faster than it increased the bargaining power of the people operating it. And this was visible in the design of the factory itself. The owner controlled the gate, clock, equipment, and the finished goods. A worker missing a day lost wages. A machine stopping for a day threatened output across the whole system, so management pushed workers to fit the needs of the capital already invested. The larger the factory grew, the more expensive idleness became. Industrial discipline grew from that incentive. Bells announced shifts. Supervisors watched the floor. Tasks were divided and measured. Time moved from a natural experience into a unit the owner had purchased through wages. This changed entire cities. Factories pulled workers toward Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, and other industrial centers. Housing appeared near mills and mines. Shops served wage earners. Banks financed manufacturers. Canals and roads carried coal and materials. One productive asset generated an economy around itself. Landowners still held power, yes, but the source of new fortunes had begun moving. A factory could produce more each year without expanding across another 1,000 acres. The owner could add machines, shifts, and buildings inside of a compact area. Wealth became denser. And this actually threatened old social hierarchies. A merchant or manufacturer could build a fortune without inheriting an ancient estate. Industrial capital created a path into elite life for families whose names carried little weight in the countryside. The path still required money, credit, knowledge, and connections. Machinery was expensive, and failure could destroy the investment. The people best positioned to own factories often arrived with commercial fortunes or access to finance already. Industrialization opened a new door while placing a high price on entry. Patents increased that price for successful inventors and firms. A protected design could grant temporary control over a useful improvement. The owner of the patent could use it, license it, or block others from copying it legally. For the first time, an idea had become an asset that could collect payment from production. This encouraged invention, although it also created battles over who owned each improvement. Industrial technology rarely appeared from one isolated mind. Mechanics, workers, scientists, investors, and earlier inventors contributed pieces. The patent system placed a legal boundary around a particular claim and gave the holder leverage over the wider process. Factories also depended on global systems built in earlier chapters. British cotton mills required raw fiber. Much of it came from plantations in the Americas, where enslaved people were forced to work. Machines in Europe increased demand for cotton, and plantation slavery expanded to meet that demand. The factory and plantation belonged to the same economic chain. One side used advanced machinery and wage labor. The other used land, violence, and human ownership. Industrial progress didn't replace older forms of extraction. It connected with them whenever they supplied cheap inputs. That's why the history of wealth cannot be divided neatly into separate ages. Land wealth, colonial trade, slavery, credit, corporations, and machinery overlapped. New systems grew on top of older ones and often depended on them. The factory owner captured value by concentrating production. Yet every factory needed coal, cotton, iron, workers, and customers. Materials arrived from different regions, while finished goods had to reach buyers before competitors did. As output increased, transport became the next bottleneck. A mill could fill a warehouse faster than horses could empty it. A mine could raise more coal than nearby roads could carry in wet weather. A city could demand food from farms too distant for cheap transport. Machines had multiplied production inside the building. But railroads would multiply the value of everything connected to the line. Chapter 9. Railroads turn networks into fortunes. Now, before the railroad, distance acted like a tax on almost every physical product. A farmer could grow more grain than the local town needed, but distant buyers offered little help if transport consumed the profit. A mine might contain valuable coal that remained nearly worthless without a cheap route to factories. A manufacturer could lower production costs and still lose customers because wagons moved slowly over poor roads. The value existed, but distance kept it trapped. Railroads connected steam power to movement. A locomotive could pull heavy roads along iron tracks at a speed and consistency that carts struggled to match. The line linked mines, farms, factories, ports, and cities into one system. Every connection changed the economics on both ends. A farmer near a station gained access to larger markets. A factory could draw material from further away. A shop could receive goods from producers it had never encountered. A city could feed more people because food arrived from a wider region. The railroad earned from this movement without planting the grain, mining the coal, or making the cloth. That made the network a new kind of productive asset. A factory owner profited from output inside one set of walls. A railroad owner collected revenue from thousands of producers whose goods crossed the same rails. The line sat between economic activity and the market it needed to reach. This position gave the railroad enormous leverage. A town served by one line depended on that company for access to the wider economy. Freight rates influenced whether a local business could compete. A station could turn quiet land into valuable commercial property. A decision to bypass a settlement could freeze its growth. The railroad did more than enter existing markets. No, it rearranged them. Building the network required capital on a scale that few private partnerships could supply. Companies had to acquire land, grade routes, build bridges, lay rails, purchase locomotives, hire workers, and maintain the system before enough traffic existed to pay for all of it. The corporation and credit market made this possible, though. Railroad companies sold shares and issued bonds. Investors supplied money today in exchange for expected revenue from passengers and freight over many years. The track was financed by claims on future movement. But this made railroad finance vulnerable to confidence. A company could own miles of useful track and still fail if construction costs rose or expected traffic arrived too slowly. Bond payments came due on a schedule, while towns and freight developed at their own pace. Investors who believed in a route kept capital flowing. When belief disappeared, unfinished tracks could sit in the landscape as evidence of a future that ran out of money. Railroad booms, therefore, helped to trigger financial crises. Banks, investors, construction firms, and landowners became tied to the same expansion. A failed line damaged more than its shareholders because so many promises had been built around the network reaching completion. Governments also played a central role here. Railways served military, political, and economic goals, so states granted charters, land, rights of way, loans, or guarantees. In the United States, the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 supported construction of a transcontinental railroad. The first route was completed in 1869. public support helped to create private fortunes, while the finished network delivered public benefits. The boundary between them became a permanent political argument. Railroad companies could earn from more than tickets and freight. Land granted beside the tracks could be sold after the line raised its value. Towns appeared around stations. Farms became viable because crops could reach cities. A company building infrastructure could capture part of the increase its own network created. And this is one of the strongest wealth mechanisms in history. Build the connection, then own the places that become more valuable because the connection exists. The United States added roughly 170,000 miles of railroad between 1871 and 1900, according to the Library of Congress. Tracks crossed regions that had once been separated by days or weeks of travel. By 1900, several transcontinental lines connected the eastern states with the Pacific coast. The map of economic opportunity changed within a single generation. New towns grew around depots and junctions. Chicago became a major rail center connecting farms and livestock from the interior with eastern markets. Grain elevators, warehouses, meat-packing plants, banks, hotels, and shops gathered near these routes. The network pulled other businesses toward itself because proximity reduced cost. And this created a feedback loop. More connections attracted more users. More users produced more revenue. Higher revenue financed additional track. Each new branch made the rest of the system more useful because passengers and cargo gained access to more destinations. Network value grew faster than track length alone. The economics favored consolidation. A small line ending at another company's track depended on an agreement to continue the journey. Larger systems could link more cities under one schedule and one management structure. Companies bought out rivals, combined routes, and fought for control of strategic corridors. The owners who controlled key connections could influence entire regions. And this power, well, as power often does, it invited abuse. Railroads sometimes offered favorable rates to large customers while charging smaller shippers more. A dominant line could squeeze farmers and businesses that had no practical alternative. Financial operators could manipulate shares, shift assets between companies, and use complex structures to enrich insiders while outside investors carried losses. The network collected trust and concentrated it at the center. Railroads also changed time itself. Towns once set clocks according to the local sun, and that worked when the journeys were slow and schedules remained local. But trains crossing long distances needed consistent timetables. So in 1883, North American railroads introduced standardized time zones to coordinate operations. Governments later gave those time zones formal legal status. A private transport network had become important enough to reorganize the clock. And the system reshaped labor, too. Construction crews cut through mountains, bridged rivers, and laid tracks across difficult terrain. The work was dangerous and often performed by migrants, immigrants, and people with limited alternatives. In the U.S., Chinese workers played a major role in building the western section of the first transcontinental railroad while facing discrimination and deadly conditions. The wealth produced by the line, well, it depended on bodies performing work the finished network would later make invisible. And rail expansion also drove dispossession. Tracks and settlements crossed indigenous lands. Government policy, military force, and commercial development pushed native communities away from territory and disrupted existing economies. The railroad carried settlers, soldiers, hunters, and goods into regions at a speed earlier systems couldn't match. Infrastructure can connect one group while overwhelming another. The same dual effect appeared in markets. Railroads lowered transportation costs and made many goods cheaper. Farmers reached more buyers, consumers gained access to products from distant regions, travel became faster and more predictable. But at the same time, the owner of a crucial route could collect a share from nearly every improvement around it. A more productive farm created more freight. A larger factory ordered more material and shipped more goods. A growing town produced more passengers. The network earned when its users succeeded. This is why network fortunes can grow beyond the companies producing the final goods. The railroad didn't need to choose which factory would win. It could carry the inputs and products of many factories. It occupied the layer through which competition itself moved. Modern payment systems, app stores, online marketplaces, cloud platforms, and digital advertising networks, they use similar economies. They provide a connection that many businesses need, then collect a fee from the activity passing through it. The technology changes. The powerful position, that remains the same though. Once many users depend on one network, leaving becomes expensive. A merchant cannot easily abandon the marketplace holding all the buyers. A software company cannot ignore the mobile platform holding its customers. A retailer can't replace a national delivery system overnight. Scale becomes protection from competition. The railroad age completed the transformation that began with the first corporations. Investors pooled capital inside of organizations larger than any individual. Factories used that capital to multiply production, while railroads linked the factories, resources, and customers into national markets. Wealth now formed around systems capable of coordinating thousands of strangers. The richest owner no longer needed the most fertile estate. No, they could own the machine that multiplied labor or the network that carried everyone else's production. Capital gained the ability to sit above an economy and collect from its movement. Yet, every locomotive still needed energy. Coal powered much of the industrial world, and new fuels would soon extend that power into ships, cars, chemicals, electricity, and war. Railroads compressed distance. But the next fortunes would come from controlling the energy that made distance collapse. Chapter 10. Oil creates the integrated empire. In 1859, Edward Drake's crew drilled a successful commercial oil well near Titusville, Pennsylvania, and helped to trigger one of the wildest resource booms in American history. Prospectors, landowners, drillers, merchants, and speculators crowded into the region. Wells appeared quickly. Barrels rolled through muddy streets. New towns formed around discoveries that could make a person wealthy in weeks, then empty without warning. The oil underground was valuable, yes, but ownership of a well offered little control over the wider market. A producer could strike oil on Monday and watch the price collapse by Friday because nearby wells had flooded the market. Storage was limited. Barrels leaked. Roads became nearly useless in bad weather. Railroads and wagon operators charged what the chaos allowed. The person drilling the oil carried the geological risk, while outsiders controlled much of the journey to the customer. John D. Rockefeller entered this world from another angle. He had worked as a bookkeeper and merchant in Cleveland, a city with strong rail and water connections. Instead of chasing each new oil field, he focused on refining crude oil into useful products. At the time, kerosene was the main prize. It burned in lamps and offered households a new source of light. Refining removed impurities and turned inconsistent crude oil into a product customers could use. That process also created byproducts that many refiners treated as waste. Rockefeller saw the refinery as a system where small savings could repeat across enormous volume. A barrel purchased for slightly less, moved for slightly less, refined with less waste, and sold through a more reliable channel created several advantages all at once. One saving looked minor. Thousands of barrels turned it into capital that could build a larger refinery, negotiate another discount, or acquire a weaker rival. Scale fed the next round of scale. Standard Oil was incorporated in Ohio in 1870. Rockefeller and his partners expanded by improving operations and absorbing competitors. Some owners accepted Standard Oil stock or cash. Others faced intense price pressure and the possibility that their transport access could become more expensive. The company pursued control over refining because refining sat between unpredictable wells and a growing national market. Producers needed someone to buy crude. Customers needed kerosene that burned safely and consistently. The refiner occupying the middle could influence both sides. Standard Oil made that position stronger through volume. Railroads competed for large, predictable shipments. A small refiner might send a few cars when business allows. Standard could promise a steady stream of oil and fill entire trains. That bargaining power produced lower transport rates and, at times, secret rebates. The company paid less to move each barrel, which lowered its costs and allowed it to undercut competitors. Some arrangements even gave Standard information about rival shipments or payments linked to traffic carried for other refiners. The railroad discount looked like a transport detail. It changed who could survive in refining. A competitor could operate an efficient plant and still lose if every barrel cost more to ship. Lower prices from Standard attracted customers, but those prices rested partly on terms smaller firms couldn't obtain. Market efficiency and negotiating power reinforced one another until it became difficult to separate the benefit created by scale from the control scale allowed. Rockefeller didn't leave transport permanently in railroad hands, though. Standard Oil invested in pipelines that carried crude from producing regions toward refineries and markets. A National Park Service history of Pennsylvania's oil region describes the company building lines toward eastern refineries and holding a virtual pipeline monopoly in the region by 1882. The pipeline removed barrels from wagons and rail cars. Oil could flow continuously through infrastructure controlled by the same organization refining it. This is vertical integration. A company expands across several stages of its value chain, keeping coordination, information, and profit inside the same system. Standard Oil purchased crude, operated pipelines, refined petroleum, manufactured barrels and cans, controlled storage, and built distribution networks. It found uses for products that earlier refiners discarded. Gasoline had limited value before automobiles, but lubricants, paraffin, petroleum jelly, and other outputs helped the company to earn more from each barrel. Waste became another revenue line. Integration reduced uncertainty. A refinery with its own supply contracts knew more about incoming crude. A pipeline connected to company facilities reduced dependence on outside transport. A distribution network gave the business direct knowledge of customer demand. Information moved across the organization faster than it moved between independent firms negotiating separate contracts. The company could plan across the entire chain. If one stage produced less capacity, another stage could be expanded. If a refinery improved its process, the gain could spread across larger volumes. If demand weakened in one region, shipments could move elsewhere through a national distribution system. Independent businesses each optimized one piece. Standard Oil optimized the movement between the pieces. The advantage became clearer during price swings. A producer earned mainly when crude was sold well. A railroad earned from transportation. A refiner earned from processing. Standard participated across several stages, so weakness in one part could be offset somewhere else. Cheap crude hurt producers while lowering the company's input cost. Expensive transport hurt small refiners while increasing the value of pipelines and favorable freight agreements. Integration turned another company's crisis into an internal transfer. The company also improved the container around the product. Wooden barrels leaked, broke, and returned empty after delivery. Standard invested in tank cars, storage tanks, and other systems that moved larger quantities with less waste. The customer might have saw kerosene at the end, while much of the competitive advantage lived in equipment the customer never even noticed. Industrial power often hides in these invisible layers. The product attracts attention. The system deciding its cost, speed, and availability, that determines who keeps the profit. This is where industrial wealth changed shape. Owning a valuable resource remained useful, yes, but controlling the system that possessed and distributed the resource could create a more durable position. Wells ran dry. Refineries, pipelines, storage tanks, brands, and customer relationships continued handling oil from many producers. The bottleneck moved downstream. Standard Oil also used the trust structure to coordinate companies across state lines. In 1882, shareholders in separate companies placed their shares under trustees who exercised central control. Now, this arrangement helped one group direct a network of legally distinct businesses. The word trust soon became shorthand for concentrated corporate power. By this stage, Standard Oil was celebrated for consistency and feared for dominance. Its size lowered costs, improved quality, and made kerosene widely available. The same organization could pressure suppliers, influence railroads, buy out competitors, and punish sellers who resisted it. Efficiency and monopoly had grown from the same operating system. But public resistance gathered around that concentration. Farmers, small businesses, journalists, and politicians watched a private organization acquire influence over transport and an essential industrial product. Ida Tarbell's detailed reporting on Standard Oil gave readers a history of the tactics used during its expansion. Political cartoons showed Rockefeller wearing a crown above tanks and railroads. The criticism even reached the courts. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court found Standard Oil in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered the combination to be broken into separate companies. And the legal breakup divided ownership. It didn't erase the integrated infrastructure, the management skills, or the demand for petroleum products. No, the successor companies included businesses that would later become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and other major firms. Shareholders received stakes in the separated companies. And as the automobile expanded the market for gasoline, the pieces became highly valuable. Rockefeller lost central control of the trust and remained connected to the wealth of the industry through ownership. And this produced an unexpected lesson. Regulation can reduce corporate control while leaving investors exposed to the underlying growth. The legal structure changed, yes, but the oil economy kept expanding through transport, chemicals, manufacturing, and daily life. The larger mechanism outlived the original empire. Modern companies pursue the same advantage through different assets. A retailer builds warehouses, delivery fleets, and payment systems. A technology company controls operating software, cloud infrastructure, app distribution, and customer accounts. A manufacturer secures supplies, logistics, financing, and service networks. Every additional stage offers a chance to capture margin and collect information. It also increases the ability to decide which outsiders gain access to the system. Therefore, vertical integration is an efficiency strategy and a power strategy in one. Coordination lowers friction. Ownership determines who benefits from the lower friction. Building these empires required vast capital. Refineries, pipelines, steel mills, rail networks, mines, and acquisitions demanded more money than even highly successful founders could easily supply from personal savings. Industrialists had learned to control production from raw material to customers, but financiers would learn to control which industrial systems receive the money to grow. Chapter 11. Finance gains power over production. Now, by the late 19th century, an industrial company could appear wealthy and still be desperate for cash. Its assets stood in plain sight: furnaces, tracks, mines, warehouses, and machines. Yet those assets required enormous spending before they ever generated revenue. Steel mills needed upgrades, railroads needed repairs and new routes. A company buying competitors needed money before the combined businesses produced any savings. The industrialist understood the factory, but the financier understood how to turn the factory's future earnings into money today. Investment banks connected businesses seeking capital with investors seeking returns. They arranged bond issues, sold shares, evaluated companies, and placed securities with wealthy families and institutions. A successful bank supplied something larger than just cash. It supplied credibility. An investor living far from a railroad couldn't inspect every mile of track or study every account, but the name of a respected banking house acted as a signal that the project had been examined and the powerful people expected it to survive. Reputation lowered the cost of capital. J. Pierpont Morgan, you might know him by J.P. Morgan, built his influence inside of this world. He came from a banking family and worked across American and European financial networks. His firm could reach investors with the resources to fund railroads and industrial combinations on a scale local banks struggled to match. And Morgan's power became especially visible in the railroad industry. Decades of rapid construction had left competing lines, overlapping routes, heavy debt, and frequent financial trouble. Companies cut prices to attract traffic, hurting the revenue needed to pay bondholders. Competition was destroying the value investors had financed. Morgan helped to reorganize troubled railroads through a process later called Morganization. Which, that name isn't very creative, is it? But let's carry on. Debt could be renegotiated. Management could be replaced. Competing routes could coordinate rates or combine operations. Bankers gained seats on boards and influence over decisions in exchange for restoring access to capital. The company survived, but control moved toward the people who organized its financing. This reveals the power hidden inside a rescue. A business needing money has fewer choices than the institution capable of supplying it. The financier can demand new managers, asset sales, spending cuts, or a merger. Capital arrives with instructions. The allocator doesn't operate the train or pour the steel. No, the allocator decides which operators continue receiving fuel. Industrial consolidation extended this influence. Large firms sought to end destructive competition, gain scale, and control supply. Morgan and other financiers arranged combinations that brought several companies under one corporate structure. The most famous example came in 1901. Morgan purchased Andrew Carnegie's steel interests and combined them with Federal Steel and other businesses to create United States Steel. The new company was capitalized at more than $1.4 billion, according to a Library of Congress industrial history. It controlled roughly half of finished steel output in the country and became the first American corporation valued above $1 billion. But no individual had built all of it from the ground up. Finance assembled existing mills, mines, rail links, managers, patents, debts, and customers into one security that investors could own. The company itself had become a financial product. And this changed the meaning of entrepreneurship at the highest level. Wealth could be created through building a factory, then created again by combining that factory with several others and changing how the market valued the whole group. The financier searched for value trapped inside of a poor structure. Two competing firms might maintain separate sales teams, offices, transport contracts, and excess capacity. A merger promised to remove duplication and strengthen pricing power. Investors could justify paying more for the combined company if expected savings and control increased future earnings. The paper arrangement changed the physical economy. Plants closed, managers moved, workers lost jobs, suppliers faced a larger buyer, and customers faced a larger seller. Financial decisions reached the factory floor. Stock exchanges increased this power by making ownership easier to trade. An investor didn't need enough money to buy an entire railroad or steel company. Shares offered smaller claims on the same assets. Bonds offered scheduled payments without direct ownership. The industrial economy could now be held in portfolios. And this separated exposure from management. A shareholder received gains and losses from a company without entering its offices. A bondholder received interest without learning how to run a mill. Capital could move from railroads to steel, banking, electricity, or consumer products with a sale and new purchase. Ownership became liquid, while workers and factories remained fixed in place. The contrast gave investors flexibility that operating communities did not possess. A shareholder worried about a mill that could sell. A worker living beside it couldn't sell a job or a home as quickly. Financial markets spread the risk for owners while concentrating the local consequences of corporate decisions. They also created information problems. Outside investors depended on accounts prepared by companies and bankers. Before modern disclosure laws, managers had wide room to hide losses, inflate values, or move assets through structures outsiders could barely understand. The ability to sell a security quickly did not guarantee that the security had been understood. Repeated banking panics exposed the fragility of the system. Federal Reserve history records 8 panics centered in New York between the National Banking Acts of the 1860s and the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Some remained regional. The panics of 1873, 1893, and 1907 spread across the country, though. Financial connections transmitted fear as effectively as they transmitted capital. During the Panic of 1907, trust companies faced runs and financial systems lacked a central institution able to respond at sufficient scale. Morgan gathered bankers in New York, examined institutions, arranged support, and helped direct private resources toward firms considered capable of surviving. One financier was temporarily performing a function the country would later expect from a central bank. The episode made his power undeniable and revealed the weakness of depending on it. A modern economy could not safely rely on one aging banker being available, informed, and willing during every crisis. The panic helped to build support for reforms that led to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Finance had become essential infrastructure. Its central power came from allocation. Every economy contains more possible projects than available capital. Someone decides which factory expands, which founder receives backing, which government can borrow, and which struggling company is allowed to fail. Those decisions shape the future before customers ever see the result. Modern private equity firms, investment banks, asset managers, pension funds, and venture investors extend the same mechanism. They rarely manufacture the product. No, they choose owners, capital structures, managers, and time horizons. The people supplying capital gain influence over the incentives faced by production. A company financed with heavy debt must prioritize cash flow because interest arrives on schedule. A public company watched each quarter may avoid investments that take years to mature. A private owner planning a sale might focus on measures that improve the next valuation. Capital structure becomes operating strategy. And the concentration of financial influence also created concern over interlocking control. The same bankers could sit on several boards, underwrite securities, advise mergers, and represent investors. Information gathered from one company improved decisions about another. A small circle of financiers could see across industries that appeared separate to everyone else. Congress investigated this system through the Pujo Committee beginning in 1912. The inquiry examined what critics called the money trust, a network of banks, directors, and corporate relationships believed to concentrate control over credit and major businesses. The issue extended beyond personal wealth. A banker with shares in several companies owned pieces of production. A banker able to open or close access to securities markets influenced the structure of production itself. This is the difference between possessing capital and controlling its circulation. A large fortune can finance several projects. A financial network can decide which projects gain access to thousands of other fortunes. By the early 20th century, industrial capitalism had solved the problem of financing enormous production. Steel, oil, machinery, and assembly lines could create goods at volumes that earlier societies would barely imagine. This created a new risk. A factory able to supply millions of products became vulnerable when millions of customers stopped buying. Finance could build the capacity. But the next fortunes would come from controlling demand for everything that capacity produced. Chapter 12. Mass consumption makes demand an asset. In 1913, workers at Henry Ford's Highland Park plant began assembling automobiles through a moving production system that carried parts and unfinished cars past specialized stations. The method combined interchangeable parts, divided labor, and controlled flow of material. Experiments reduced the time required to build a Model T from around 12.5 hours to about 93 minutes. The result was more than just a faster factory. Lower production costs allowed Ford to reduce prices, which brought the car within reach for more households. Higher demand kept the line moving, and greater volume created further savings. Mass production needed mass consumption to complete the cycle. The factory could no longer wait for customers to arrive by chance. No, its machines, payroll, and debts continued generating costs every day. Empty production capacity represented money that had been invested and was producing nothing. Demand became something companies had to build, predict, and protect. Ford's experience also showed the connection between workers and consumers. The assembly line was monotonous and punishing. The Henry Ford Museum reports that labor turnover reached 380% by late 1913. In 1914, Ford announced a $5 day for qualifying male workers, replacing the $2.34 for a 9-hour day with $5 for 8 hours. The higher pay helped the company retain people willing to endure the line's discipline, but it also placed more purchasing power in the workers' hands. An industrial economy needed households capable of buying industrial output. This didn't mean every worker could immediately purchase everything produced. No, it meant that wages, prices, credit, and output were becoming parts of the same mass system. A company selling to ordinary households needed a large population with income beyond food and rent. Distribution widened that population into a national market. Sears used the mail-order catalog to reach rural customers living far from large stores. The catalog placed clothing, tools, furniture, appliances, medicines, and even actual house kits inside of one printed marketplace. And as an aside here, seriously, look up the Sears house kit because it'll blow your mind. These houses are old, but they are still out there in the wild. But all right, let's get back to the story. So, a family could compare items at a kitchen table, send in an order to the Sears catalog, and receive goods through rail and postal networks. The catalog performed several jobs at once. It advertised, explained products, displayed prices, reduced uncertainty, and turned a distant corporation into a familiar presence inside the home. Government infrastructure helped the model to grow. Rural free delivery expanded mail service in the late 19th century. Railroads moved parcels. The postal system completed the last part of the journey. Sears owned the customer relationship while public and private networks carried the order. Department stores built another version of the same machine inside cities. They gathered many categories under one roof and made shopping an experience. Window displays turned sidewalks into advertising space. Escalators and elevators moved customers between floors. Seasonal promotions created reasons to return. The store organized attention before the customer selected a product. This position gave retailers bargaining power. A manufacturer needed shelf space and access to shoppers. The store could decide which goods appeared prominently, which were discounted, and which disappeared from view. Control of demand began influencing production upstream, too. National advertising extended that control beyond the store. Newspapers, magazines, billboards, radio, and later on television allowed one message to reach millions of people. Companies could introduce a name before a customer ever saw the product. A brand reduced the mental cost of choosing. An unfamiliar can of food, soap, or medicine required inspection, but a recognized name carried previous experience and the expectation of consistency. Packaging allowed the customer to identify the product quickly. And advertising attached the name to cleanliness, status, health, family, freedom, or modern life. The object became surrounded by meaning. Coca-Cola offers a very clear example here. The drink could be copied in basic form, but the company invested in its name, bottle distribution, and advertising. A standardized experience made the product recognizable across stores and cities. Advertising then linked that recognition to social moments and emotional images. A customer asking for the brand had already narrowed down the retailer's choices, and this reversed bargaining power. A manufacturer selling an unknown drink depended on the store to recommend it, but a famous brand could bring customers into that store asking for it by name. Retailers now needed access to the demand the company had created. The most valuable asset sat partly inside the customer's memory. That asset was difficult for competitors to copy, of course. A factory could purchase similar machines. A chemist could create a similar formula. A new company could print attractive packaging. But repeated trust, built over years, could not be installed in an afternoon. Brand equity gave old demand a way to produce future sales. Consumer credit widened the market again. A household might want a car, radio, refrigerator, or washing machine while lacking the cash to pay full price. Installment plans divided the purchases into smaller payments and spread across future income. Credit pulled demand forward through time. The factory made tomorrow's products today. Customer finance allowed households to spend tomorrow's wages today. The two systems fit together because companies needed current buyers and workers expected future paychecks. This increased sales while placing obligations inside household budgets. A product could be enjoyed immediately, but part of the next month's income already belonged to the lender. Enough installment buying could make the wider economy sensitive to job losses and falling confidence. Demand had been accelerated, not created from nothing. Advertising added another pressure here. Companies producing similar goods had to remain visible. A quiet brand risked losing shelf space and attention even if the product had not changed. Marketing spending became a defensive cost required to preserve the customer relationship. The competition moved from the factory into the mind. And companies, they needed better information about that mind. Sales records showed what customers had purchased, while surveys, test markets, coupons, and retail reports offered clues about why. Packaging colors could be tested, prices could be changed in one city, an advertisement could run in one magazine and include a code revealing which readers responded. Demand became measurable enough to manage, and this reduced risk before mass production began. A factory planning 1 million units needed more confidence than a craft worker making 10. Research tried to estimate the size of the market, identify likely buyers, and discover which promise would move them. The better a company became at predicting demand, the more aggressively it could invest in the supply. And this changed where profit accumulated. Manufacturing remained essential, of course, but the physical object could become one of the easiest pieces to replace. A company controlling design, brand, financing, distribution, and other customer data could hire outside factories to make the product. The factory owner competed for a contract. The brand owner controlled the buyer. Modern consumer technology, fashion, luxury, food, and franchise businesses often follow this structure too. Production can move between suppliers, while the customer account, logo, software, store, network, or franchise system remains under central control. Demand becomes the stable asset around which flexible production is arranged. And this explains why two products with similar physical costs can sell at very different prices. The higher price might pay for design, distribution, retail space, financing, advertising, and the confidence attached to a name. The material inside the package tells only part of the economic story. The rest of the value lives around the object. Mass consumption also reshaped identity. Products began marking taste, class, age, profession, and belonging. A car represented mobility and status. A radio connected a household to national culture. Clothing allowed people to enter social spaces looking like the group they hoped to join. Companies learned that aspiration could be converted into recurring demand. And this made growth less dependent on population alone. A business could encourage existing customers to replace products sooner, upgrade to a higher tier, add another category, or adopt a new standard of comfort. The definition of enough could keep moving. Product lines made that movement easier. A basic model brought someone to the brand. A premium version offered status or convenience. Accessories increased spending around the original purchase. New additions created visible differences between what a customer owned and what the market now presented as current. The company no longer needed a completely new customer for every sale. No, it needed another reason for the existing customer to return. Loyalty programs, warranties, service plans, subscriptions, and proprietary parts later extended that relationship beyond the first transaction. Each connection made switching more expensive and gave the company another chance to collect revenue. The sale became the beginning of an economic relationship. That movement supported factories and created waste, debt, and environmental pressure. Durable products competed with newer models. Packaging improved recognition and increased discarded material. Advertising turned dissatisfaction into a commercial input. Consumer capitalism gained strength by shortening the emotional life of objects. By the middle of the 20th century, the largest companies had learned to coordinate production, finance, distribution, and desire. Industrial companies no longer waited for demand to appear. No, they researched it, financed it, advertised to it, and measured it. Wealth had moved closer to the customer. Standard Oil showed the power of owning a value chain. J.P. Morgan showed the power of deciding which chains received capital. Mass marketing companies showed the power of owning the relationship at the end of the chain. Factories created products. Brands made those products easier to want and harder to replace. The next transformation would push ownership further away from physical assets. Stocks, bonds, mortgages, pensions, and derivatives would turn future cash flows into a financial world large enough to influence the economy beneath it. Industrial capitalism, it taught companies to manufacture demand at scale. But financial capitalism would teach nearly everyone to live through claims on the future. Chapter 13. Real estate turns debt into personal wealth. In the early 1930s, an American family could make every mortgage payment for years and still face one enormous bill at the end. Home loans were commonly short, often lasting 5 years or less. They demanded large down payments, and many did not reduce the principal much along the way. The borrower paid interest and then had to refinance the remaining balance when the loan matured. As long as banks kept lending and property prices held, the arrangement could roll forward. When the Great Depression closed banks and destroyed incomes, that final payment became a trapdoor. Foreclosures spread through cities and farms. A house could still have a roof, a kitchen, and a family inside of it, yet the financing beneath it had stopped working. The asset had not disappeared. The bridge between present income and long-term ownership had collapsed. The crisis pushed the federal government into the design of the mortgage market. The Homeowners Loan Corporation refinanced troubled loans. The Federal Housing Administration, created in 1934, insured approved mortgages against default. Fannie Mae followed in 1938 to support a secondary market where lenders could sell mortgages and recover money for new loans. The shape of the household balance sheet began to change. Before these reforms, first mortgages could require down payments near 50%. A buyer needed years of savings before approaching the front door. FHA insurance reduced the lender's risk and helped to establish loans repaid through regular monthly installments. Terms lengthened to 20 years and eventually to 30 years in 1954. A home could now be purchased with a smaller portion of its price in cash, while future wages carried the rest. That sounds like a change in payment schedules, but in practice, it brought leverage into ordinary life. Imagine a house costing $100,000. A buyer contributes $20,000 and borrows $80,000. If the property rises 10%, its value becomes $110,000. The owner's equity has moved from $20,000 to roughly $30,000 before transaction costs and mortgage repayment. A 10% increase in the asset produced a 50% increase in the original equity. Debt gave a modest pile of cash control over a larger asset. The same multiplication runs backward. If that house loses 10% of its value, half of the starting equity disappears on paper. If rent or wages can no longer cover the monthly payment, the owner may be forced to sell at the worst moment. Leverage accelerates the journey in either direction. After the Second World War, the upward direction dominated the national story. Returning veterans gained access to government-backed mortgages through the GI Bill. Highways opened up land beyond city centers. Builders divided fields into streets and produced houses with industrial speed. Jobs and household incomes expanded while local banks, savings institutions, and federal guarantees supplied credit. In places such as Levittown, New York, rows of nearly identical homes appeared where potatoes had once grown. Walls, roofs, plumbing, and appliances moved through a building process organized almost like an assembly line. Buyers arrived with monthly budgets rather than sacks containing the full purchase price. The United States homeownership rate had fallen to about 44% in 1940, but by 1960, it reached 61.9%. Millions of households entered an arrangement that combined shelter, forced saving, and a leveraged investment into one address. Each mortgage payment did several jobs, too. Interest paid the lender for supplying capital. The principal reduced the debt and increased the owner's equity. Maintenance preserved the asset. Property taxes funded local services that could influence the appeal of the neighborhood. If the area became more desirable, the land beneath the house could rise in value even while the building aged. And this is why real estate wealth often feels as if it's being created in the background. An owner goes to work, pays the mortgage, repairs a leaking pipe, and sleeps in the property. Years later, part of the debt is gone, and the market price might be higher. A renter pays for shelter too, although that payment builds the landlord's equity and helps service the landlord's loan. The landlord adds another layer to the mechanism. Rental income can cover interest, taxes, insurance, repairs, and part of the principal. When the numbers work, tenants help to retire the debt while the owner keeps the remaining cash flow and any long-term appreciation. A small building, therefore, produces wealth through several channels at once. It can generate rent, gain value, receive favorable tax treatment, and become collateral for another loan. The owner may refinance after the property appreciates, withdraw part of the accumulated equity, and use it to buy another building. One property could become the down payment for the next. Commercial real estate magnifies this logic. An office building, a warehouse, hotel, or shopping center is valued largely through the income it can produce. Raise occupancy, improve the tenant mix, extend leases, or reduce operating costs, and the building may command a higher price. Investors are purchasing walls and land, but they're also purchasing a stream of contracted payments. The lease can be as important as the bricks. And location gives those bricks a quality that factories cannot reproduce. Another company can manufacture a similar chair, but it cannot manufacture another corner at 5th Avenue and 57th Street. Land near jobs, transport, good schools, entertainment, or a growing business district is limited by geography. Public investment can make it even more valuable. A new road, subway station, park, or university improves access and draws activity toward nearby parcels. Private owners may capture part of that publicly created value through higher rents and sale prices. Then local rules add another force: scarcity by permission. Zoning decides what can be built, where it can stand, and how many households or businesses may occupy a parcel. Height limits, parking requirements, minimum lot sizes, long approval processes, and bans on apartments can keep supply from responding when demand rises. The neighborhood becomes more desirable. More people want to enter, construction remains restricted, bids rise for the homes that already exist. An owner's largest gain may come from the homes that were never allowed to be built. This incentive is easy to understand from the kitchen table. Existing residents have much of their savings tied to local property values. New apartments could add traffic, change the view, or place pressure on services. Voting against construction can feel like protecting both a neighborhood and a retirement account. Across an entire city, that protection can create an expensive wall around opportunity. Workers must travel further from jobs. Young families delay buying. Rent consumes more income. Employers struggle to recruit. The scarcity rewards people already inside the ownership system and raises the price of admission for everyone arriving later. And the original mortgage revolution also left many families outside. Federal underwriting standards and private lending practices graded neighborhoods by perceived risk, frequently punishing Black communities and other minority neighborhoods. The practice of redlining denied credit based on location, even when individual borrowers could repay. Restrictive covenants and discrimination limited where families could buy. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed housing discrimination, yet earlier access had already shaped decades of compounding. A family able to purchase in a rising suburb gained equity that could finance education, a business, retirement, or the next generation's down payment. But a family denied the same entry. They paid for housing without receiving the appreciating asset. The gap didn't require money to be removed from an account every year. No, it grew because one balance sheet contained leverage and appreciating land, while the other did not. Real estate teaches one of the central lessons of modern wealth. Income pays the monthly bill, while ownership captures the change in the asset's value. During strong markets, that change can exceed what a household manages to save from wages. During weak markets, the bill remains even as the equity shrinks. Therefore, debt has to be matched to staying power. A property owner survives vacancies, repairs, rate changes, and downturns through cash reserves and manageable payments. The attractive spreadsheet assumes time will be available. Excessive leverage lets the lender decide how much time remains. Used carefully, the mortgage converts future income into present control of a scarce asset. And that asset can provide shelter, cash flow, collateral, and the claim on the growth of a place. Used carelessly, the same structure turns a modest decline into a personal crisis. By the late 20th century, households had become comfortable signing contracts that stretched across decades. Their homes were financed by networks connecting borrowers, banks, insurers, government agencies, pension funds, and investors who might never see the property. Real estate had made leverage personal. And Wall Street was preparing to apply the same idea to companies and to turn ownership itself into a full-time industry. Chapter 14. Wall Street turns ownership into an industry. For most of history, ownership had a face. The merchant stood behind the counter. The mill owner could walk across the factory floor. Share markets loosened that connection, but the industrial corporations still carried the names and personalities of founders, families, and powerful bankers. During the 20th century, the owner increasingly became a chain of institutions. A teacher contributed part of a paycheck to a pension plan. The pension hired an investment manager. The manager placed money in a fund. The fund bought shares in hundreds of corporations and might also commit capital to another partnership that purchased entire businesses. At the end of the chain stood the worker's retirement. At the operating end stood executives negotiating with professional owners whose capital represented thousands or millions of people. This transformation began with pools. Insurance companies collected premiums long before claims were paid. Pension plans received contributions decades before many workers retired. Mutual funds gathered small investments and purchased diversified portfolios. Banks, university endowments, foundations, and wealthy families each held capital that needed to earn a return. Now, individually, these pools followed different rules, but together, they created a permanent market for financial expertise. The Investment Company Act of 1940 established rules for companies such as mutual funds that primarily invest and trade in securities. The law addressed conflicts that appear when professionals control other people's money. Disclosure, custody, governance, and limits on self-dealing became part of the infrastructure that allowed strangers to place savings inside of a common vehicle. The mutual fund made corporate ownership divisible and convenient. A saver didn't need to research, purchase, and monitor dozens of separate stocks. One fund share provided a claim on a portfolio managed by somebody else. This widened access while adding a layer between the beneficial owner and the company. Retirement policy deepened that pool. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 set federal standards for private pension plans and created the individual retirement account. At the end of that year, American retirement assets totaled about $400 billion. Much of that capital sat in defined benefit plans where employers promised future payments and investment professionals managed the assets that needed to meet them. Then, defined contribution plans, including the 401k, shifted more investment responsibility toward individual workers. Payroll deductions began flowing into mutual funds with each pay period. People who never considered themselves business owners acquired small claims on factories, retailers, banks, drug companies, and technology firms through retirement accounts. Ownership spread across society on paper. The decisions attached to those shares remained concentrated in fewer offices. Asset managers selected securities, met corporate executives, voted proxies, and decided where the next $1 billion should move. Scale lowered research and trading costs across a larger pool. It also gave institutions negotiating power that an individual saver could never match. The professional owner could compare thousands of opportunities and move capital away from a weak company without closing a store or dismantling a machine. A click or a phone call changed the portfolio. The physical business stayed where it was, and this made capital more mobile than labor, buildings, or communities. One branch of finance tried to beat the market by finding underpriced assets. Another challenged the price of expertise itself. In 1976, Vanguard introduced the first index investment trust, later renamed the Vanguard 500 Index Fund. Instead of paying managers to select winners, the fund attempted to track a broad market index at a lower cost. The idea was ridiculed as passive and unambitious. Its deeper position was powerful, though. If an investor could own the productive economy cheaply and diversify widely, more of the market's return could remain with the saver rather than being consumed by fees and trading. The index fund turned broad corporate ownership into a product. Other institutions pursued a more forceful model. They didn't want a small share of hundreds of companies. They wanted control of a few. A private equity partnership raises money from investors such as pension funds, endowments, insurers, and wealthy families. The partnership contributes equity, borrows additional money, and acquires a company. The target company's assets and future cash flows often support much of the debt. And this is the corporate version of the leveraged property purchase. Just suppose a firm buys a company for $1 billion using $300 million of investor equity and $700 million of debt. Over several years, the company uses cash from operations to pay down part of the loan. If profits also grow and the business later sells for $1.3 billion with only $400 million of debt remaining, the investors receive $900 million before fees and other adjustments. The company price rose 30%. The equity tripled. Leverage created the difference, supported by the operating business underneath it. The owners can improve that outcome in several ways. They might close weak locations, renegotiate purchasing, replace managers, combine the company with a competitor, invest in better systems, sell unused property, or focus the business on its most profitable customers. Each move claims to increase cash flow, reduce risk, or convince the next buyer that future earnings deserve a higher valuation. The company becomes a collection of adjustable claims. Its factories can be sold and leased back. A division can become a separate company. Debt can replace part of the owner's original equity. Intellectual property can be licensed. Tax losses may offset future profits. Supplier contracts can be renegotiated. Real estate hidden on an old balance sheet can be worth more than the market realizes. Modern finance learned to look through the product and examine every contract surrounding it. This discipline can rescue an unfocused company. A professional owner with capital, specialists, and a deadline might make decisions that dispersed shareholders and comfortable managers avoided for years. Better inventory systems, stronger pricing, and sensible acquisitions can create genuine value. The same pressure can damage the engine producing the cash. Debt payments arrive on schedule. Investment in equipment, staff, research, and maintenance can be delayed. A company carrying a heavy loan has less room for a recession or a sudden change in customer demand. Cost cutting improves this year's spreadsheet, sure, until it removes the people and the capabilities needed for next year's revenue. Leverage makes mediocre management visible quickly. It can also make a temporary problem fatal. The takeover boom of the 1980s brought this machinery into public view. Corporate raiders bought stakes and demanded changes. Investment banks arranged enormous packages of loans and high-yield bonds. Management teams watched their stock prices because a company valued too cheaply could become somebody else's target. RJR Nabisco became the era's great spectacle. In 1988, a management-led proposal opened a bidding contest for the tobacco and food conglomerate. Kohlberg Kravis Roberts ultimately won with a deal valued around $25 billion, at the time the largest leveraged buyout ever completed. Fees, debt, personalities, and competing visions for the company filled newspapers and later a best-selling book. A corporation producing cigarettes, cookies, and crackers had generated cash flow stable enough to support a mountain of borrowed money. Investors were buying the right to redirect those future cash flows. That right came with a clock. The debt had to be serviced, assets were sold, and operations reshaped. The transaction showed how a familiar company could become raw material for a financial structure larger than the business story customers knew. As ownership professionalized, corporate managers learned a new language. Return on equity, earnings per share, cost of capital, and shareholder value moved closer to the center of decision-making. A factory expansion competed against a share repurchase. A research project competed against an acquisition. Every dollar had to defend its place against another possible use. And this improved discipline in some companies, but shortened patience in others. The person saving for retirement, they rarely see these trade-offs. The account statement shows a fund name and a balance. Behind that number, managers allocate capital across thousands of businesses, and those businesses respond to the incentives attached to the capital. Fees matter because they repeat across the entire chain. A one-time charge looks small. An annual fee removes money, plus all the future returns that money might have earned. The fund manager, consultant, broker, administrator, lender, and deal sponsor can each receive compensation before the final beneficiary sees the result. Scale makes few basis points worth fortunes. The wealth opportunity opened by this system is broad ownership. A diversified fund allows a household to participate in corporate growth without owning a factory or selecting one perfect company. The power opportunity is more concentrated. The institution deciding where pooled capital flows can influence executive careers, strategy mergers, and the survival of entire firms. Capital ownership and capital control separated even further. The beneficial owners became millions of savers. The practical owners became professional managers operating through contracts. The companies remain physical, full of employees and equipment, while the claims above them became easier to divide, combine, borrow against, and sell. Finance had learned to scale ownership. The next industry would remove much of the physical product from the equation and discover that a valuable asset could be copied without being divided at all. Chapter 15. Software removes the cost of repetition. In January 1975, a computer appeared on the cover of Popular Electronics, looking more like laboratory equipment than a household product. The Altair 8800 arrived as a kit. It had switches, lights, little memory, and no friendly screen waiting for the customer to click. Hobbyists saw possibility inside that metal box. Paul Allen and Bill Gates saw a missing layer. The machine needed software. They developed a version of the basic programming language for the Altair. The program allowed people to give instructions to the computer in a form far more approachable than flipping switches. Microsoft grew from that wedge between hardware and usefulness. At first, the economics looked surprisingly familiar. Software traveled on paper tape, disks, manuals, and physical packages. Developers needed computers, time, and specialized skills. Customers sometimes copied programs freely, which Gates complained about in his 1976 open letter to hobbyists. A digital product could spread easily, including beyond the point where its creator gets paid. That problem revealed software's unusual power. A car company needs to buy steel, glass, rubber, and labor for the next car. A software company can spend years and millions of dollars creating the first reliable version, then reproduce the finished code for almost nothing. The 1,000th copy doesn't require a 1,000th engineering team. The first unit carries the development cost. The next unit carries a tiny distribution cost. The cost structure creates operating leverage. Revenue can rise much faster than the expense of producing additional copies. Once sales cover research, salaries, and support, a large portion of each new license can become profit or fund the next product. The decisive question becomes distribution. How does one piece of code reach millions of machines? Well, IBM supplied an answer in 1980 when it prepared to enter the personal computer market. The company was a giant of business computing with a trusted name, powerful sales channels, and customers around the world. But it needed an operating system for the IBM PC. And Microsoft? Well, they signed a contract to provide one. The operating system became PC DOS on IBM machines. Microsoft retained the rights to the underlying system and licensed it to other computer manufacturers as MS-DOS. When companies produced IBM-compatible computers, many needed software capable of running the same applications that customers already used. Each new hardware competitor expanded the market for Microsoft's operating system, and this was an extraordinary position. IBM and the clone manufacturers paid to design, assemble, ship, and support physical computers. Microsoft supplied a standard layer that could sit across many of them. The hardware makers competed against one another while the software provider earned revenue across the expanding category. In 1981, the IBM PC shipped with MS-DOS. In 1983, Compaq released a compatible portable computer after legally reverse-engineering IBM's BIOS and licensing MS-DOS from Microsoft. The manufacturers followed. By 1996, IBM-compatible machines held an estimated 83% of the personal computer market. Compatibility created a loop. Customers wanted computers that ran popular programs. Developers wanted to write programs for systems with many customers. Hardware manufacturers wanted an operating system that already attracted both groups. Every participant made the standard more useful to the next. The code could be copied cheaply, while the ecosystem around it became expensive to replace. Microsoft announced Windows in 1983 and released Windows 1.0 in 1985. The graphical interface placed menus, windows, and a pointer above the commands of DOS. Later versions made the computer easier for ordinary office workers and households to use. As personal computers spread, Microsoft could license operating systems and applications such as Word and Excel across a huge installed base. A new version required engineering, testing, documentation, and marketing. So after that work, millions of customers could receive nearly identical bits. Factories had spent 2 centuries searching for cheaper repetition. Software changed the meaning of repetition itself. There was still physical infrastructure, yes. Disks had to be manufactured, boxes had to reach stores, computers needed chips, factories, electricity, and repair. Yet the valuable instruction set inside the box did not wear out when another person used a copy. One person reading a book doesn't prevent another person from reading the same words. Software pushed this property into a programmable asset that could perform work repeatedly. A payroll program could calculate wages for one company, then be licensed to thousands. A database could organize records in banks, hospitals, and airlines. A design program could replace drafting tools across entire professions. The seller didn't have to build the core product for every customer. No, enterprise software added another form of durability. Once a large company trained employees, moved data, wrote custom integrations, and built daily operations around a system, then switching became expensive. The license gained value from the disruption its removal would cause. The customer was purchasing capability and accepting dependence at the same time. Licensing preserved the creator's ownership. A customer usually acquired permission to use the program under defined terms rather than the underlying intellectual property. This allowed the same asset to be sold repeatedly without leaving the owner's control. And the legal wrapper became part of the wealth machine. Copyright protected expression in the code. Patents could protect certain inventions. Contracts limited copying and defined permitted use. Trademarks identified trusted products. Technical standards shaped which programs could communicate. A factory owner defended a gate and a warehouse. A software owner defended rights, interfaces, and compatibility. Venture capital evolved alongside these new economics. Young technology companies often had little current profit and few hard assets a traditional bank could seize. Their value lived in a team, a technical idea, a growing user base, and the possibility of reaching a huge market. Equity investors could fund years of development in exchange for a share of that possibility. Most bets would remain small or frail. One successful company could return many times the original investment because the product expanded without a matching expansion in factories and inventory. The venture portfolio matched the software cost curve. Losses were limited to the money invested, while a winner could scale far beyond the amount first imagined. And this changed where ambitious talent gathered. Engineers, founders, investors, lawyers, and early employees clustered around places where ideas could find capital and capital could find technical skill. Stock options allowed companies short on cash to offer employees a claim on future value. The employee was helping to build an asset that might multiply. Salary paid for present labor. Equity offered participation in the system the labor created. The rewards were uneven because software companies did not scale equally. Consulting firms sold hours and had to add people as projects grew. Custom software required new work for each client. A product company could build one core program and distribute it widely, which allowed revenue to separate from headcount a bit more dramatically. But the strongest model owned reusable intellectual property and a channel to customers. Piracy, competition, and technological change kept the model from becoming effortless. Code requires maintenance. Security flaws appear, hardware evolves, customers demand support. A dominant standard can be replaced when a new platform makes old compatibility less important. Low reproduction cost also helps competitors copy ideas and distribute alternatives. The moat rarely comes from cheap copying alone. It grows from the brand, installed base, data, developer tools, customer habits, contracts, and distribution surrounding the code. The software product becomes a seed for an ecosystem. By the 1990s, the internet was beginning to remove the remaining friction in delivery. Programs and updates could travel through networks instead of boxes. Digital media could reach a customer without a store shelf. Online services could charge subscriptions, observe use, and improve continuously. The product no longer needed to leave the company's infrastructure at all. A customer could pay for access while the software remained on remote servers. That shift made recurring revenue easier to build. A perpetual license created a large payment followed by uncertain upgrades. A subscription divided access into monthly or annual payments. Predictable renewals made future cash flows easier to estimate, which made the business easier for financial markets to value. The lesson: traveled beyond software. Music, films, games, courses, designs, research, and financial products could all be encoded, copied, and distributed at low marginal cost. Creation remained expensive and uncertain. Successful reproduction became almost free. Industrial wealth had required control over materials, machines, and transport. Financial wealth had made claims on those assets divisible and tradable. Digital wealth placed growing value in an intangible system whose next copy consumed almost none of the original. For the first time, a small team could build a product in one place, sell nearly the same unit millions of times, and preserve ownership of the underlying asset. Software scaled the product. The internet would scale its distribution, connect every side of the market, and turn participation itself into an advantage. The largest fortunes of the next era would gather around the systems through which everything else moved. Chapter 16. Platforms own the market around the product. In July 1995, an order appeared on a computer screen in a small Seattle office. The customer had purchased a science book about fluid concepts and creative analogies. The order arrived through a new online bookstore called Amazon, where desks were made from doors and the company bell rang whenever somebody bought something. The first sale looked like ordinary retail with a modem attached. A customer wanted a book. A merchant found it, charged a card, placed it in a package, and sent it through the mail. The unusual part was the shelf. A physical bookstore could display only what its floor space allowed. An online catalog could list far more titles because the website didn't need to hold every book in the room. Software organized the selection, while warehouses, distributors, and postal networks handled the physical movement after the customer made a choice. Jeff Bezos had entered the book biz because the category contained millions of distinct titles. No single shop could stock all of them, which made the gap between a physical shelf and a digital catalog easy to see. Amazon's early advantage came from selection, convenience, and the absence of geographic limits. A reader in a small town could search the same catalog as a reader in New York. The company still had to earn trust from people being asked to type credit card details into a screen, then wait for a package from a business they had never visited. Every order helped to solve that problem. More customers produced more revenue, and that revenue funded better warehouses, faster software, broader inventory, and lower prices. And better service attracted more customers, which gave the company another round of resources to improve the system. This is the beginning of a self-reinforcing business. A normal product must persuade the next customer on its own merits. A network can become more useful because earlier customers and participants are already there. Amazon expanded beyond books, first adding categories it could sell directly. Then, it opened up more of the site to outside merchants. A seller who already owned inventory could list products in front of Amazon's growing audience. Customers received greater selection without Amazon purchasing every item itself. The retailer was becoming a marketplace, and that changed the economics. When Amazon sells its own product, it buys inventory, stores it, prices it, and carries the risk that it will not sell. When a third-party merchant sells through the marketplace, the merchant carries much of that inventory risk, while Amazon can collect fees for access, transactions, fulfillment, advertising, or related services. The platform earns from activity it organizes. More buyers make the marketplace attractive to more sellers, and more sellers expand selection and create competition, which makes the marketplace attractive to buyers. Each side improves the offer presented to the other. Credit card networks had already demonstrated the same structure. A card becomes useful to consumers when many merchants accept it. Merchants want to accept the card when many consumers carry it. The network sits between the groups, sets the rules, verifies transactions, and collects a small amount whenever value moves through the system. The railroad collected money when goods crossed its tracks. A digital platform can collect money when commerce, attention, software, or communication passes through its rules. The product sold to each side may be different. Buyers receive selection and convenience. Sellers receive demand. Advertisers receive attention. Developers receive access to users. The platform coordinates them all through one operating system. And Google built another version around a nearly empty page. In the late 1990s, the web was filling with pages faster than people could navigate them. Search engines existed, yet results were often cluttered or easily manipulated. So Larry Page and Sergey Brin developed a system that treated links between pages as signals of relevance. A useful result brought the searcher back, and each returning searcher expanded the audience Google could later connect to advertisers. The search box was free because charging the searcher would have slowed the side of the network that advertisers wanted to reach. Google's advertising system allowed businesses to bid for placement around relevant searches. A plumber didn't need to purchase television campaigns and hope that a leaking pipe appeared somewhere in the audience. A business could now show an ad when a person typed words revealing immediate intent. The searcher supplied the moment. The advertiser paid for access to it. An auction helped to allocate that limited attention. Price mattered, but Google also had an incentive to protect relevance. A useless advertisement might produce short-term money, but weaken the search experience that created the audience. Better matching could help users, improve click rates, and make the inventory more valuable to advertisers. One query therefore activated several assets at once: an index of the web, computing infrastructure, ranking software, advertiser demand, an auction, payment systems, and years of accumulated feedback about what people found useful. The simple page concealed an industrial system. But Apple's App Store later showed how a platform could surround a physical product. The iPhone was valuable as a device, sure, but outside developers could give it functions that Apple never had to invent alone. A developer gained distribution to customers carrying the phone. Customers gained games, banking, navigation, music, and work tools. More useful applications helped to sell more phones, which made the audience more attractive to developers. The platform owner controlled the gate between them. It could approve software, set technical standards, process payments, feature certain apps, collect commissions, and change rules. These controls offered security and convenience while concentrating enormous bargaining power in the operator. The same architecture appeared across rides, accommodation, food delivery, freelance work, payments, video, and social media. The platform usually owned fewer of the assets being exchanged than an old industrial company would have owned. Drivers supplied cars, hosts supplied rooms, creators supplied videos, merchants supplied products, developers supplied apps, and the platform supplied the market around them. This asset-light appearance can be misleading. Digital platforms require costly engineering, data centers, customer support, fraud detection, legal systems, and marketing. Physical platforms such as delivery marketplaces also depend on local operations and real people moving through cities. The difference lies in who funds each incremental unit of supply. A hotel chain pays to build another hotel. An accommodation platform can add another room when the host lists one. A media company pays to produce another show. A creator platform can add another video when a user uploads one. Participants expand the inventory while the platform expands the rules and distribution. Trust becomes essential because strangers are being brought together. Reviews, identity checks, payment protection, refunds, rankings, insurance, moderation, and dispute systems reduce the fear surrounding a transaction. Each tool makes exchange easier. And they also give the platform more influence over whose offer is visible and whose account remains active. Reputation becomes portable inside the network and difficult to carry outside of it. A seller might spend years collecting reviews on one marketplace. A driver might complete thousands of trips. A creator might gather subscribers. Leaving means abandoning part of that history, learning a new system, and rebuilding an audience. The exit door remains open, although the value accumulated inside of it makes it heavy. Scale then improves economics in several directions. Fixed engineering costs are spread across more transactions. A larger network catches fraud patterns sooner. More activity justifies better logistics and customer service. Advertisers pay more for broader reach. Sellers concentrate effort where buyers already gather. Success strengthens some of the conditions required for further success. And this helps to explain why internet markets often become winner-take-most rather than perfectly winner-take-all. Several platforms may survive, especially when people use more than one. Local rules differ, or participants have distinct needs. But even so, the largest network can hold an advantage that doesn't appear in a simple product comparison. A new competitor may offer cleaner software and still begin with no buyers, sellers, reviews, developers, or advertisers. It needs to build multiple sides together. Paying to attract one group is wasted if the other group fails to arrive. The empty marketplace is a wonderfully designed party where nobody came. Platforms often solve this cold start problem by acting like ordinary businesses first. Amazon sold its own inventory before relying heavily on outside merchants. A ride platform may subsidize early trips to attract both drivers and passengers. A payment company might target one narrow community where transactions already happen. An app ecosystem can begin with applications created by the platform owner. The company manufactures the first activity, then invites participants to manufacture the rest. Once the network is established, the operator can add adjacent services. Amazon offered storage and fulfillment to merchants, advertising brands, subscriptions to customers, and cloud infrastructure to businesses. The launch of Amazon S3 and EC2 in 2006 turned computing resources into services that outside companies could rent on demand. Infrastructure built for one giant platform became a platform for other companies. This move reveals the deepest form of digital wealth. Selling a product creates revenue once. Owning a marketplace creates revenue across many sellers. Owning infrastructure beneath other businesses creates a claim on their growth even when their products have nothing to do with yours. The opportunity for a smaller company is rarely to build another global everything platform from day one. No, it's to find a fragmented market where buyers and providers struggle to locate, trust, pay, or coordinate with one another. The valuable layer might be scheduling, verification, financing, software integration, or specialized distribution. The platform wins by reducing the friction that kept the market small. Yet a platform can begin extracting too much. Higher fees, worse search placement, restrictive rules, or competition against its own suppliers may increase short-term profit, but weaken participant trust. The network looks powerful because everyone is present. Everyone is present because leaving alone is costly. That tension attracts regulators and competitors searching for a way to loosen the lock. Therefore, every platform manages two systems. One coordinates exchange. The other protects the willingness of each group to keep participating. The first internet fortunes gathered around markets larger than any single product line. The platforms could see searches, clicks, purchases, routes, messages, reviews, and abandoned carts flowing through their systems. That observation created another asset. The network no longer had to serve as a road connecting people. No, it could study the traffic and become better at predicting where everyone would go next. Chapter 17. Data turns human behavior into capital. At 8:17 in the morning, somebody types 3 words into a search box. Best running shoes. The person sees links, product images, reviews, maps, and advertisements. And behind the screen, several systems begin making guesses. Is this research or an immediate purchase? Which result is useful? Which advertiser will pay? Which device is being used? Does location matter? What happened after similar searches yesterday? The query lasts just seconds, but its economic life can be much longer. An individual piece of data is usually unimpressive. One search reveals little. One purchase, route, pause, skipped song, or abandoned cart, it could mean almost anything. Collected across millions of people and connected to outcomes, though, those traces begin to form patterns. And patterns reduce uncertainty. A retailer deciding how many winter coats to order is placing a bet months before the weather arrives. An airline selling a ticket price is estimating demand for one seat on one route at one time. A bank reviewing a loan is estimating the chance of repayment. An insurer is estimating the cost of future claims. Better prediction moves money away from mistakes. If a retailer shows which sizes sell in each city, fewer products sit unsold. If a payment network recognizes fraud quickly, fewer legitimate transactions need to be blocked. If a warehouse predicts demand by region, popular items can wait closer to outcomes. If an advertiser identifies likely buyers, fewer impressions are spent on people with no interest. The value is rarely in the data point itself. It appears in the decision changed by that data. This distinction matters because companies often collect information simply because storage is cheap and collection is possible. A warehouse full of unlabeled boxes is not useful inventory. Data needs to be cleaned, organized, joined, interpreted, protected, and connected to an action that affects revenue, cost, or risk. Raw information becomes capital only when it enters a working production system. Google's search advertising offered a clear example. A search query revealed intent. Advertisers submitted bids. Google's system estimated relevance and the likelihood of a click. When users ignored an ad, clicked it, returned to the results, or completed a purchase on an advertiser's site, those outcomes could help to improve future decisions. Essentially, the market generated feedback while operating. Recommendation systems use a similar loop here. A viewer opens a streaming service and receives a personalized screen. The platform has observed what was started, completed, replayed, skipped, searched for, or abandoned. It compares those signals with patterns across other viewers and estimates what will keep this person watching. The recommendation changes behavior, which produces new data, which shapes the next recommendation. And this creates a subtle problem. The system observes the choices it helped to create. If a song is placed at the top of a playlist, more people will hear it. The extra listening may convince the system that the song deserves even more exposure. A ranking can become part of the reason the ranked item succeeds. Prediction begins shaping the world it claims to measure. And retail works the same way. A product placed high in search receives more clicks and reviews. Those signals can improve its ranking. Sellers learn to design tiles, images, prices, and advertising around the platform's algorithm. The marketplace is no longer only measuring demand. No, it's teaching participants how demand will be distributed. And this is why control over data and control over distribution reinforce one another. A company with distribution observes more behavior. More behavior can improve predictions. Better predictions improve the product and the efficiency of advertising, logistics, pricing, or risk management. Those gains attract more customers and business partners, producing another round of behavior to observe. The factory improved when the owner installed better machinery. A digital system can improve because millions of people use it. The user's role becomes unusual. A person receives a service and also supplies some of the signals that make that service more valuable. The search, route, review, purchase, and correction can each become an input to future performance. The customer is part consumer, part sensor. And that doesn't mean that every data point is sold or that all companies use information in the same way. Some businesses sell advertising. Others use data intentionally to reduce fraud, plan inventory, improve products, or price risk. The economic mechanism behind it is broader than the phrase selling data. Information changes allocation. Consider a delivery network. Each package produces timestamps, locations, route choices, failed attempts, traffic conditions, and customer preferences. One driver's route is a local story. Millions of routes reveal which roads slow at which hours, how long each building takes, where demand is growing, and and how much capacity a depot would need. The capacity can turn yesterday's movement into tomorrow's schedule. Financial institutions have always gathered information because lending is a prediction business. Digital records expand the number of speed and available signals. Payment history, debt, income, account behavior, and fraud patterns can help decide whether to extend credit and at what price. The consequence reaches beyond convenience. A model that underestimates risk can create losses across thousands of loans. A model that overestimates risk can deny opportunity to qualified borrowers. If historical data reflects earlier discrimination or unequal access, a system can reproduce those patterns through variables that appear neutral. An efficient prediction can still produce an unfair decision. Insurance adds another layer to this. Driving sensors, health records, property details, and claims histories can sharpen estimates. Better segmentation may reward low-cost customers while making coverage more expensive for people the model expects to cost more. But as prediction improves, the old idea of a broad pool sharing uncertain risk can give way to narrower prices attached to each person. Information can reduce uncertainty for the company while increasing vulnerability for the individual being measured. Privacy is therefore an economic boundary, not only a personal preference. Data can reveal relationships, health concerns, political interests, financial stress, location, and routines. A leak can expose people. An unexpected use can change the price or opportunity presented to them. A profile assembled from many ordinary actions can say more than any single action appeared to disclose. Consent becomes difficult when the future value of the information is unknown at the moment it's collected. And security also becomes part of the balance sheet. A database useful to the company may also be useful to criminals, competitors, or governments. Collection creates an asset and a liability at the same time. Encryption, access controls, retention limits, auditing, and incident response are the locks around the new warehouse, while quality creates another constraint. Missing data, fake reviews, bots, duplicated records, measurement errors, and changes in customer behavior can weaken predictions. A model trained on last year's market may fail when prices, tastes, or regulations shift. Data has a shelf life when the world changes beneath it. The strongest advantage often comes from proprietary feedback that a competitor cannot easily purchase. A generic list of customer names is less powerful than years of verified transactions connected to outcomes. A hospital's carefully governed clinical records, a manufacturer's equipment failure history, or a logistic company's route data might contain patterns available nowhere else. Useful exclusivity comes from the relationship that generated the information. This gives smaller businesses a practical path. They may never hold the largest general dataset, yet they can own a narrow loop around a valuable decision. A maintenance company can record which machine symptoms predict failure. A specialist lender can study repayment in an overlooked market. A software company can use customer workflows to identify the next task that should be automated. The advantage is built by servicing the niche supply enough that every transaction teaches the systems something relevant. Data alone doesn't protect that advantage. Talent must turn it into models. Infrastructure must process it. Product design must deliver the prediction at the moment a decision is made. Distribution must place the product in enough hands. Trust and legal permission must keep the loop operating. Information is one layer in a stack. By the early 21st century, the largest digital companies had assembled loops connecting participation, observation, prediction, and distribution. Users improved the systems they returned to use. Advertisers funded 3 services that produced more behavior. Sellers optimized around rankings that controlled access to buyers. Then, a new class of model began absorbing patterns from the text, images, audio, code, and scientific data. Prediction was moving beyond which link a person might click. It could produce language, designs, analyses, and instructions. The system had learned from behavior. The next contest would center on systems capable of performing parts of the cognitive work itself. Chapter 18. AI moves the bottleneck to intelligence. Late at night inside a data center, there's no visible sign of intelligence. Rows of machines sit beneath cables, fans, cooling pipes, batteries, and power equipment. Electricity enters, heat leaves. Tiny switches inside semiconductor chips change state at extraordinary speed. Somewhere in that physical process, a model predicts the next word, recognizes an image, writes code, or searches a space of possible answers. The output feels weightless. The system producing it is industrial. This is the final turn in the history of wealth, because every earlier age multiplied a scarce form of human capability. Agriculture multiplied food beyond what gathering could provide. Machines multiplied muscle. Railroads multiplied reach. Software multiplied instructions. Networks multiplied connection. Artificial intelligence begins to multiply parts of analysis, creation, recognition, and decision-making. The roots reach back decades. Researchers developed systems inspired loosely by networks of neurons, then passed through cycles of excitement and disappointment as computing power, data, and methods failed to meet expectations. John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton made foundational contributions to neural networks during the 1980s. Their work eventually received the 2024 Nobel Prize in Physics. The ideas waited for an economic environment capable of scaling them. Digital platforms produced vast datasets. Video games drove demand for graphics processors able to perform many calculations in parallel. Cloud computing made large pools of processing power rentable. Semiconductor manufacturing packed more capability into each generation of chips. Several separate industries were unknowingly assembling the factory for machine learning. In 2012, a neural network called AluxNet achieved a dramatic improvement in an image recognition competition using graphics processors. The result showed that larger models, more data, and parallel computing could outperform older approaches on an important task. In 2017, researchers introduced the transformer architecture in a paper titled "Attention is All You Need." The design handled relationships across sequences while allowing more parallel training. It became a foundation for systems that learned patterns across enormous collections of language and later expanded into images, audio, video, and other forms of information. That public encounter changed on November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT opened a conversational interface into a language model. People could ask for explanations, drafts, summaries, code, plans, and revisions using ordinary language. The machine no longer required a programmer to design a separate interface for every narrow task. Language became the control panel. That interface made a complicated economic possibility easy to feel. A person could describe a task and receive cognitive output in seconds. The answer might be useful, flawed, inventive, generic, or confidently wrong. Yet the cost and speed were unlike hiring a separate specialist for every first draft. The scarce resource had begun to move. For most of history, expanding knowledge work meant finding, training, organizing, and paying more people. A law firm added associates, a design studio added designers, a software company added engineers. Each person carried limited hours, attention, and expertise. But an AI system can perform another inference without recruiting another human each time. The company still pays for computing, energy, software, and oversight, but output can grow faster than headcount in tasks the model handles well. This is operating leverage applied to cognition. The first draft of a marketing concept, translation, customer service reply, code function, research summary, or product image can be generated repeatedly. Human effort moves towards setting goals, supplying context, judging quality, handling exceptions, and accepting responsibility. The job doesn't vanish into a machine. its bottleneck changes shape. When drafting becomes cheap, judgment becomes more valuable. When code becomes faster to produce, deciding what to build and verifying security become more important. When images become abundant, taste and trusted distribution determine what receives attention. When analysis becomes easier, access to accurate proprietary information can separate a useful answer from polished nonsense. Abundance raises the value of the component that remains scarce. This pattern has appeared throughout the story. Cheap shipping increased the value of ports and networks. Cheap manufacturing increased the value of brands and demand. Cheap software reproduction increased the value of standards and distribution. Cheaper intelligence can increase the value of energy, chips, data, trust, ownership, and access to customers. The AI wealth stack begins far below the model. Electricity powers every training run and every answer. Data centers need reliable connections to the grid, backup systems, cooling, land, fiber, and water or alternative cooling systems. A facility might take years to permit and connect, while software demand changes in months. In 2024, the United States Department of Energy reported connections requests for hyperscale facilities in the range of 300 to 1,000 megawatts or more, with lead times of 1 to 3 years stretching local grids. The International Energy Agency estimated that global electricity generation serving data centers could rise from about 460 terawatt-hours in 2024 to more than 1,000 terawatt-hours in 2030 under its base case. A digital boom can run into a transformer, turbine, transmission line, or permitting queue. Semiconductors form the next layer here. Training and operating modern models requires advanced logic, memory, networking, storage, power management, and packaging. Each component moves through a specialized global supply chain involving design software, manufacturing equipment, materials, fabrication plants, and assembly. The smartest algorithm remains a document until chips can run it. Scarcity can appear at any point. A leading chip might depend on manufacturing capacity concentrated in a small number of facilities. High bandwidth memory may constrain how quickly processors exchange data. Advanced packaging might delay completed systems. Networking equipment might limit how efficiently thousands of chips work together. The bottleneck earns attention because all the other layers are waiting behind it. Data centers assemble those components into rentable computing capacity. Cloud providers can spread the enormous fixed cost across many customers, just as earlier railroads spread track costs across shipments. A startup gains access to machines it couldn't afford to build alone. The provider earns whether the startup trains a model, stores data, or serves a customer. The cloud can profit across competing AI companies because each requires the same underlying infrastructure. Foundation models sit above computers. They're trained across broad datasets and adapted to many tasks. Building a frontier system can demand elite researchers, carefully prepared data, enormous computing budgets, and long periods of experimentation. Stanford's 2025 AI Index reported that nearly 90% of notable models released in 2024 came from industry, up from 60% the year before. Capital intensity had returned to the heart of a software revolution. Yet, the cost of using capable models has also fallen rapidly as chips, algorithms, and competition improve. This creates pressure in two directions. Training the largest general systems may concentrate among a few organizations, while cheaper access allows thousands of companies to build applications above them. The model can be scarce at the frontier and abundant at the application layer. Proprietary data can make a general model useful in a specific business. A model trained on public language may know how contracts are written. It doesn't automatically know a company's negotiated terms, approval rules, past disputes, or current obligations. Secure access to that context transforms a fluent general tool into a working system. The valuable data is often the information a business accumulated before AI arrived. Applications turn capability into a completed job. A foundation model can generate text. A useful legal application retrieves the right documents, respects permissions, cites evidence, fits an existing workflow, and sends uncertain cases to a qualified person. A medical tool requires clinical validation and careful governance. A financial tool needs audit trails, current data, and controls around consequential decisions. The distance between an impressive demonstration and a dependable product is filled with unglamorous work. Distribution sits above the application. The company already holding the customer relationship can place AI inside an email client, office suite, search engine, design tool, phone, bank account, or enterprise system. Users encounter the feature where work already happens. A superior model without distribution may struggle to find customers. A trusted product with millions of users can introduce a capable model through one update. Customer relationships complete the stack. Businesses will allow AI systems to see sensitive documents, take actions, spend money, or communicate with clients only when they trust the provider. Reliability, security, privacy, service, and accountability become commercial assets. The more capable the system becomes, the more expensive a mistake can become. Artificial intelligence, therefore, creates opportunity at every layer. Energy developers can supply dependable power. Semiconductor companies can relieve computer and memory constraints. Data center operators can build capacity. Model companies can improve general intelligence. Data owners can create specialized advantages. Application builders can automate valuable workflows. Distributions can reach customers. Trusted brands can take responsibility for the result. The largest fortune may form wherever demand hits the narrowest gate. This is why asking which AI model will win is too small of a question. Models can improve, converge, become open, or fall in price. If intelligence becomes cheaper, businesses may spend more on the systems that feed it and the actions that enable it. If intelligence becomes cheaper, businesses may spend more on the systems that feed it and the actions it enables. Better medical analysis increases the value of clean clinical data and regulatory approval. Faster software development increases the value of product judgment, security, and customer access. Automated design increases the value of taste, brand, and intellectual property. The complement captures what the commodity gives away. Labor will feel the transition unevenly. Tasks are easier to automate than entire occupations because jobs combine routine production, judgment, social trust, physical action, responsibility, and knowledge that may never have been written down. A model can draft a report while a manager still decides what matters, verifies the claims, persuades the client, and bears the consequence. Workers who learn to direct and verify these systems may produce more. Companies may need fewer hours for some outputs and discover demand for entirely new outputs elsewhere. Earlier technologies removed tasks, changed jobs, created industries, and distributed gains unevenly. AI will operate through the same messy economy rather than above it. Ownership decides who receives the upside. If an employee uses AI to produce twice as much, the gain could become higher wages, lower prices, greater profit, shorter hours, or some combination of them. Technology doesn't choose among them. Contracts, competition, bargaining power, and ownership do. The tool changes production. Institutions divide the result. Risk also scales with output. Models can fabricate information, reproduce bias, expose confidential data, assist fraud, or fail in unfamiliar situations. Connecting them to tools allows mistakes to move from words into actions. Security testing, human review, monitoring, and limits on authority become part of the cost of useful automation. Cheap cognition, without reliable control, can manufacture errors at industrial speed. The strategic response is to locate the scarce, defensible layer. A company using the same general model as every competitor needs something the model provider does not supply: proprietary workflow data, regulated access, specialized expertise, customer trust, physical operations, or distribution into a valuable market. The strongest application does more than wrap a chat box around an industry. It owns a process that improves through use and becomes harder to replace. This brings the history of wealth back to its oldest pattern. Grain wealth belonged to those controlling the surplus and storage. Land wealth belonged to those controlling territory and law. Trade wealth gathered around routes. Industrial wealth gathered around machines, energy, and distribution. Financial wealth gathered around leverage and claims. Digital wealth gathered around standards, networks, and low-cost reproduction. While AI adds scalable cognitive output, then sends the search for scarcity through the entire stack beneath and above it. The technology is new. The wealth pattern, though, is very familiar. Find the bottleneck. Establish ownership, build the system around it, and expand while the new market is still difficult, before its structure becomes obvious to everyone standing outside. 5,000 years ago, wealth waited behind the walls of a granary. Whoever controlled the stored grain could survive a failed harvest, feed soldiers, reward allies, and shape what happened next. The granary eventually gave way to estates, ships, banks, factories, oil fields, railways, brands, software, platforms, and now machines capable of producing cognitive work. The objects changed because every age developed a new dependency. The fortunes gathered around whoever could own that dependency and make others pass through it. Across this entire journey, surplus created the first opening. Ownership turned that opening into a continuing claim. Leverage allowed one field, machine, loan, instruction, or network to produce value far beyond the effort of a single person. Then, time tested every fortune by moving the bottleneck somewhere else. And that final step explains why yesterday's symbol of power can become tomorrow's museum piece. A family may inherit land after commerce moves to the ports. An industrial empire may keep its factories while value moves into software. A technology company may own the best model while customers, energy, proprietary data, or trusted distribution become harder to replace. So, the useful question is rarely limited to which industry will grow. Look at what that industry will be forced to buy, access, protect, or pass through as it expands. Somewhere inside of that constraint sits a gate, and gates have collected tolls throughout history. The next great fortune may emerge from chips, energy, robotics, biology, finance, or a system that is yet to receive a name. Its surface will look new, but its foundations will be ancient. Wealth keeps changing, but it usually leaves a forwarding address. Ownership over whatever the future cannot function without.